You know what this bike means to whoever owns it? Logan said, his voice cracking. If I don't bring it back, if I can't explain what happened, I'm dead. Do you understand me? I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you I am a dead man. He grabbed Ethan's arm with both hands, his fingers trembling. Please, please don't let that happen. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it, because what happened that night in Bakersfield changed one man's life in ways he never could have prepared for. The eviction notice had been sitting on Ethan Walker's desk for 11 days. He hadn't thrown it away. He hadn't called the number at the bottom of the page. He hadn't told anyone about it either. Not his buddy Hector, who ran the auto parts store 2 blocks over. Not his neighbor, Mrs. Pham, who always left him food on the steps when she thought he wasn't looking. Not even his sister back in Phoenix, who called every Sunday and asked how the shop was doing and always sounded so proud of him. He just let it sit there, under a coffee-stained rag curling at the corners, because throwing it away didn't make it go away, and calling the number didn't mean he'd have anything useful to say on the other end of the line. So, he owed 4 months of commercial rent on a building that was worth less every year in a neighborhood that had been slowly emptying out since the economy took a turn and never quite turned back. The landlord, a property management company out of Sacramento that he'd never met in person, only dealt with through email, had been patient longer than he deserved. He knew that, and they'd finally reached the end of patient. Ethan was 38 years old. He had blonde hair that had started going sandy at the temples, a lean face that looked older than it was because of the sun, and the long hours, and hands that told the whole story of his life without him having to open his mouth. Scarred, calloused, permanently darkened at the knuckle creases from engine grease that soap couldn't fully reach. Those hands had rebuilt carburetors, straightened bent frames, coaxed seized engines back to life, replaced brake lines on bikes that had no business still being on the road. They were good hands, honest hands. They just hadn't been enough to keep the lights on. Walker's motorcycle repair had been open for 9 years. Before that, Ethan had been working out of his driveway, then out of a shared bay at a friend's shop in Fresno. Then finally at 29, he'd scraped together enough to rent his own space. He'd done it the hard way. No investors, no family money, no lucky break. Just skill and stubbornness and an almost irrational belief that if you did good work and treated people right, things would eventually even out. The problem was Bakersfield in the mid-2020s wasn't exactly a boom town for small independent shops. The dealerships had service departments that came with warranties and loaner bikes and waiting rooms with free coffee. The chain shops undercut his prices by running on volume and hiring kids fresh out of technical school who didn't know half of what Ethan knew, but cost a third of what he needed to earn to survive. And his customers, the ones who came back year after year, the ones who referred their friends, the ones who trusted him, they were mostly working people. People on tight budgets. People who sometimes paid in installments, sometimes paid late, sometimes looked at him with so much shame in their eyes when they had to say they needed another 2 weeks that Ethan ended up telling them not to worry about it. He said that too often. He knew it. He just couldn't stop. So now it was a Wednesday night in early October, and the last customer of the day, a retired school teacher named Frank, who'd brought in his old Honda Shadow for a valve adjustment, had picked up his bike 2 hours ago. Frank had paid in cash exact change and shaken Ethan's hand for a full 5 seconds while telling him he was the best mechanic in the Central Valley. Ethan had thanked him. He'd watched Frank ride away, then stood in the open garage door for a while, listening to the sound of the engine fade down the street. Then he went back inside, sat on the rolling stool he'd had for 15 years, and looked at the eviction notice. 11 days. They'd given him 30 from the date of the letter, which meant he had 19 days left, which meant nothing because he didn't have the money, and 19 days wasn't going to manufacture it. He thought about selling equipment. The hydraulic lift was worth something. The tire mounting machine, some of his specialty tools, the good ones, the ones he'd bought piece by piece over years, because he believed in having the right tool for the ball and not the cheap substitute. He could probably scrape together enough to pay 1 month's back rent, maybe 2. But that still left 2 more, and it didn't address the months ahead. And at some point, you had to be honest with yourself about what you were doing versus what you were pretending to do. He was sitting there with that thought, the heavy settling weight of it, when he heard the crash. Not a small sound, not something distant that might have been a car backfiring or a trash can tipping over. This was violent and immediate a sound with mass and speed behind it, the kind of sound that makes your chest tighten before your brain has processed what it is. Metal against asphalt, the skid of tires leaving rubber on pavement, and then a secondary impact lower and final, like something coming to a stop that hadn't planned on stopping. Ethan was out the door before he made a conscious decision to move. He ran toward the sound. The street in front of the shop was mostly empty at that hour. A few parked cars, a street light that flickered every 30 seconds on a reliable cycle, and there 20 yards down from his parking lot was a motorcycle on its side in the road still rolling, slightly one wheel spinning slow. And next to it a figure trying to sit up. Ethan reached him in seconds. The rider was young, mid-20s at most, maybe younger. Dark hair, a cut across his cheek that was bleeding freely. He was moving, which was the first good thing. Conscious, which was the second. When Ethan crouched next to him and put a hand on his shoulder, the young man looked up and his eyes were haunted and wild and terrified in a way that wasn't just shock from the crash. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked. "Can you tell me where you're hurting?" "My shoulder," the young man said. "I think, yeah, my shoulder and my knee, but I can move them." He tried to stand and immediately hissed in pain. "Don't. Take a second." Ethan kept his hand on the man's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Logan." He said it like he wasn't sure he should. "Logan Carter." "Okay, Logan, I'm Ethan. I've got a shop right there. Can you walk if I help you?" Logan looked at the shop, then back at the motorcycle. Something shifted in his face. The pain didn't disappear, but something else showed up on top of it. Something that Ethan couldn't immediately name. "The bike," Logan said. Ethan turned and looked at it properly for the first time. Even in the uneven light from the street, it was clear this wasn't a fender bender. The Harley-Davidson had gone down hard and traveled. The front end had taken the worst of it. The forks were bent at an angle they were never designed to bend, and one of them appeared to be cracked through. The headlight assembly was gone, just wires and a broken bracket where it used to be. The tank had a deep dent on the right side and paint scraped down to bare metal along a 6-inch stretch. The handlebars were torqued. The right mirror was shattered. The exhaust pipe on the low side was crushed flat for about 4 inches and then kinked upward. The foot peg had snapped off entirely. Ethan had been looking at damaged motorcycles his entire adult life. He'd rebuilt bikes that people said were totaled. He'd taken frames that looked like sculpture from a car crusher and turned them back into functional machines. He had a good eye for the difference between what was done and what was savable, and his honest assessment of this bike in this moment was that he wasn't sure. That wasn't something he was ready to say out loud yet. "We'll deal with the bike," Ethan said. "Come on, can you stand?" He helped Logan to his feet. The young man was in real pain. His shoulder was almost certainly separated or badly bruised, and he was moving his right leg carefully, but he was upright, and he could put weight on both feet. Ethan got an arm under him and walked him toward the shop. Inside, under the fluorescent lights, Logan looked worse and younger both at once. He had the kind of face that people described as open features that didn't hide much. And what they didn't hide right now was fear that had nothing to do with the pain in his shoulder. Ethan pulled up a shop stool, guided Logan onto it, and went to the back for the first aid kit he kept on the shelf above the sink. He came back, opened it on the workbench, and started cleaning the cut on Logan's face. It wasn't deep. It would close on its own, maybe leave a small scar. "I'm going to need to call for an ambulance," Ethan said. "That shoulder needs to be looked at." "No," Logan said it fast, then again quieter. "No, please don't." Ethan stopped what he was doing. The shoulder could be separated, could be worse. "I've had a separated shoulder before. I know what it feels like. It's not that. It's just bruised. It'll be fine." Logan met his eyes. "Please, don't call anyone." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the way Logan said it that went beyond a young man not wanting to deal with insurance paperwork. The fear in his eyes was specific. It was pointed at something Ethan couldn't see. "You're not going to tell me this was a hit and run, are you?" Ethan said. "Nobody else was involved in this." "It was just me. I took the turn too wide and the back end went out. The road's got some oil on it back there. I could feel it in the second the tire broke loose." Logan's jaw tightened. "It was just me." "Okay." Ethan finished cleaning the cut and put a strip of butterfly closure across it. "So what is it that's scaring you then? Because it's not the shoulder." Logan looked at the floor. He didn't answer for a moment. When he looked back up, his eyes were steady, but his voice wasn't. The bike, he said. The bike belongs to someone important. I borrowed it. He stopped, started again. I didn't exactly ask first. The garage went quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Whose bike is it? Ethan asked. Logan shook his head. It doesn't matter whose it is. What matters is that it's destroyed, and I need to fix this before morning or I don't. He stopped again, pressed his lips together. I can't explain all of it, but I need that bike repaired, and I need it to not look like this, and I don't have a lot of time. Son, Ethan said, and he didn't use the word condescendingly, just the way an older man speaks to a younger one when something important needs to be said. If you borrowed someone's motorcycle without asking, and it looks like that right now, the conversation you're going to have is going to be hard regardless. A repaired bike doesn't erase what happened. You don't know these people, Logan said. You don't know what repaired versus destroyed means in terms of what they decide to do. Ethan set the first aid kit down on the workbench. He looked at Logan carefully. The young man wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't performing fear to get sympathy. Whatever he was afraid of was real to him in a way that sat in the room like a third person. How far did you need to go? Ethan asked. Logan blinked. What? Tonight, on the bike. How far were you going? You said you borrowed it because you had to get somewhere. Logan hesitated. I needed to get to my sister. She called me and she was in a situation and she needed me there. And I didn't have my car. I'd lent it to my roommate and the bike was right there. And I made a decision and I made it fast and I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't think of another way. He looked down at his hands. She's okay now. I got there. I got her out of there. And then I was coming back in the turn. Is your sister safe right now? Yeah, she's safe. I got her to her friend's place and she's okay. Ethan nodded slowly. He stood up from where he had been crouching in front of Logan and walked to the open garage bay. He looked out at the street at the motorcycle still lying on its side in the road. He could see from here the extent of the damage, the bent forks catching the streetlight at their wrong angle, the crushed exhaust, the dented tank. He thought about his brother, Danny, 22 years old when it happened. A November night on a highway outside Fresno. A car that crossed the center line and made contact, and Danny's bike going down hard, and Danny lying on the shoulder of the road for 37 minutes before anyone stopped. 37 minutes. Ethan knew the number because it came up in the accident report, and he'd read that report so many times the pages had gone soft at the folds. Nobody stopped for 37 minutes. The people who drove past, and there were 14 of them, the report estimated they all had somewhere to be. It was a cold night. It was dark. The highway was unfamiliar. There were reasons. There were always reasons. Danny survived, but not fully. Not the same. He lived in a group home in Modesto now, and Ethan called him twice a week and sent money when he could. Danny didn't always remember the accident. Some days he didn't remember Ethan's name. Standing in the garage door looking at Logan Carter's borrowed Harley on the asphalt, Ethan Walker made a decision that he knew was financially irrational and personally costly and probably exactly what he'd do again if he ended up back in this moment 1,000 times. He turned around. I'm going to go pull the bike into the shop, he said. You're going to sit there and let that cut close up, and we're going to see what we're dealing with. Logan stared at him. I don't have money. I mean, I have some, but this isn't going to be cheap. I know that. And I didn't say anything about money, Ethan said. I said we're going to see what we're dealing with. He walked out to the street and got the Harley upright. It was heavy and awkward, and his back complained. He walked it into the garage and kicked the side stand down and stepped back and looked at it properly for the first time under good light. It was worse than he'd thought, and he'd already thought it was bad. The front forks weren't just bent. The right one was cracked through at the lower leg, a fracture that ran clean across the tube. That was not a repair. That was a replacement. The headlight assembly was entirely gone and would need to be sourced. The front wheel had taken impact damage and was out of true. It might be salvageable, might not. The tank dent was structural enough that it would need either careful reshaping or replacement. The handlebars were torqued past what straightening would fix. The foot peg was a clean snap that could be welded if he had the right piece. The exhaust, the crushed section was bad, but not impossible. He walked around the bike twice. He crouched and looked at the frame. He ran his hand along the down tubes and checked the headstock. The frame itself miraculously appeared to be intact. The crash had been violent, but it had been a sliding crash, a momentum crash, not a direct impact compression crash. The engine looked clean on the outside, no visible case damage, no obvious fluid loss. It was bad. It was not impossible. I need to ask you something, Ethan said without turning around. Okay, Logan said from the stool. The person whose bike this is, are they going to come looking for it tonight? A pause long enough that Ethan turned around to see Logan's face. I don't know, Logan said. Maybe. The bike was parked in front of the clubhouse. If someone notices, it's gone before morning. Clubhouse, Ethan repeated. Logan met his eyes and didn't look away. Ethan had been in Bakersfield for 9 years. He was not a naive man. He understood what the word clubhouse meant in the context of a young man who was terrified about returning a borrowed motorcycle before dawn. He turned back to the bike. Okay, he said. Okay. Logan's voice cracked on the word. Okay, as in I heard you and I'm still going to help you, and I need to know if we have until morning or if we have until midnight. Ethan was already pulling on his work gloves, because it changes which parts of this I tackle first. Logan was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. We should have until morning, he said. Probably. Good. Ethan reached for his diagnostic light. Then let's get started. What followed was the kind of work that reminds you why people fall in love with mechanical things. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. Because a broken thing is broken in ways you can identify and address one problem at a time. And at the end, there's either progress or there isn't, and there's no ambiguity about which one you've achieved. Ethan started with his forks because they were the most critical and the most complicated. He pulled them off, the lower leg and set the cracked right fork aside and went to his parts inventory. He had spare fork tubes from a similar model purchased at an estate sale 3 years earlier from a rider who'd died and whose family was selling off his shop. The diameter was close but not identical. He'd need to machine the ends to fit properly, and he had the lathe to do it, but it would take time. He set the lathe running and went back to the tank. Logan watched him work. At first he sat on the stool holding his shoulder saying nothing. Then after about 20 minutes he slid off the stool and came closer. Ethan handed him a light without being asked, and Logan held it steady, angling it where Ethan pointed. You do this for a living, Logan said. It wasn't a question. Trying to, Ethan said. You're good at it. Yeah. Ethan didn't say it with pride, just accuracy. He set down the body hammer and picked up the dolly block. Hold that light right there. Don't move it. The tank dent was at the lower right, just above the seam. He worked from the inside, careful with the pressure, feeling the metal move under his hands. It took 35 minutes to get it to a place he was satisfied with. It would never be factory perfect. There was a slight ripple that would be visible under direct light at the right angle, but it was solid, structurally sound, and from 3 feet away it looked right. That's incredible, Logan said quietly. Ethan set the tools down and straightened up and felt his back. Tell me about your sister. Logan looked up. What? You said she was in a situation that you had to get to her. Ethan began disassembling the handlebar assembly. What kind of situation? Logan was quiet for a moment, then, she's 19. She's been staying with this guy, her boyfriend, or someone she thought was her boyfriend, and things had been getting bad for a while, but she kept telling me it wasn't a big deal, that I was overreacting, that he wasn't as bad as I thought. His voice flattened the way voices do when people are reporting facts that hurt too much to editorialize. She called me tonight at 9:30. I could tell from her voice. I knew. I didn't need her to explain. I just said, stay where you are, I'm coming. And the car was with your roommate. My roommate took it to Sacramento for the weekend. I tried to call him, but he wasn't picking up, and I was standing there in the parking lot of my apartment, looking at the bike, and it was right there. And I knew I shouldn't. I know exactly whose bike it is, and I know exactly why I shouldn't. But she needed me. He stopped. I'd make the same call again. I need you to understand that. I know it was wrong, and I'd do it again. Ethan worked the last bolt free on the handlebar clamp. I understand that. You don't think I'm an idiot? I think you made a desperate decision in a desperate moment, and it happened to go badly in a specific physical way that has nothing to do with whether it was right or wrong. He set the handlebars aside. The choice itself getting to your sister. No, I don't think you're an idiot. I think you're her brother. Logan swallowed. He held the light steady. 2 hours into the work, Ethan ran into the problem he'd known was coming. The right fork tube. The machined ends had come out right, the fit was workable, but he needed the correct seals and the specific fork oil specification for this model, and what he had in stock was close but not exact. Close might be okay. Close might also mean a fork seal failure in 6 months. He didn't build things to fail in 6 months. He stood at the parts cabinet for a long time. Then he walked to the far corner of the garage where a motorcycle sat under a canvas cover. He stopped in front of it. He hadn't uncovered it in 3 weeks. He didn't look at it most days because looking at it made him think about everything he'd been planning that wasn't going to happen. And he'd learned that thinking about things that weren't going to happen was not a useful activity when there was still work to do. But the forks on this bike, his personal Harley, a 1987 Electroglide he'd been rebuilding for 6 years, were the right model, the right year, close enough in specification that the seals and the oil grade were identical. He'd rebuilt those forks from scratch. They were perfect. He pulled the cover back. Logan, who had followed him, made a sound, not a word, just a sound. A small intake of breath that meant he understood immediately what he was looking at. "That's your bike," Logan said. "Yeah. That's not a parts bike. That's not a project bike. That's someone's motorcycle." "Yeah." "Ethan," Logan stepped forward. "You can't. I need the right seals." Ethan began removing the front wheel. "And I need the right fork oil, and I need to not have your bike fail on you 3 months from now because I used the wrong spec part." He didn't look up. "So we're going to use the right parts. I'll pay you back." Logan's voice had gone rough. "I will pay you back every single cent, I swear to God." "I know you will." Ethan set the wheel aside. "Or you won't. Either way, we're going to do this right." He worked the forks off his own bike, carefully preserving everything, laying each piece in order on a clean shop rag. His own beautiful work taken apart now to fix someone else's problem. He thought briefly about what his younger self would say about that. His younger self who had scraped and saved and sacrificed for years to build this machine. He decided his younger self would probably understand, even if he'd also be furious. He carried the parts back across the garage and began installing them. By midnight, the fork assembly was complete and properly torqued. The tank was reshaped and the structural integrity was solid. The handlebar situation had required creative solution. He'd sourced a set from his salvage pile, an inch longer than original, but within the acceptable range, and they'd work. The foot peg had been welded back on using a piece from his steel stock that he'd machined to size. That left the headlight assembly and the exhaust. "Go get some water from the small fridge by the back door," Ethan said. "And there's a box of protein bars in the cabinet above it. Bring some." "I'm not hungry," Logan said. "I didn't ask if you were hungry." Logan went and came back. He handed Ethan a water bottle and a protein bar and sat on the floor near the bike because the stool was across the garage and he didn't bother retrieving it. Ethan ate standing up without looking away from the exhaust section he was evaluating. "Can I ask you something?" Logan said. "Sure." "Why are you doing this?" Ethan turned the section over in his hands. The crush damage was over a 4-inch span. He could work the pipe back close with the right tools and some careful heat application, or he could cut the section and sleeve it, which would be faster and potentially cleaner. You know, people ask me that sometimes, usually when I've discounted a job or work past closing time. "What do you tell them?" Usually I tell them I don't know. He set the section down. "Tonight I actually do know, so I'll tell you the truth." He picked up his heat gun. "I had a brother. He had an accident when I was 26 on a highway outside Fresno on a cold night, and he was down on the shoulder of the road for 37 minutes before anybody stopped. 37 minutes. He turned the heat gun on and let it run for a moment. He needed someone to stop, and 14 people drove right past him. And that one thing, that one decision that all those people made, it changed his life permanently. Changed mine too. Changed our whole family." He began applying controlled heat to the crushed section of pipe. "So when someone needs help in front of my shop, I don't think about it too much. I just go." Logan didn't say anything for a while. "Is he okay?" he finally asked. "Your brother. He's alive," Ethan said. "He lives in a group home. He's happy on most days. He doesn't remember everything, but on his good days, he's funny, and he likes baseball, and he remembers my name. He worked the pipe gently, feeling the metal respond to the heat. That's enough. That's good. He got the exhaust section to about 80% of its original shape. Still a visible repair if you knew what you were looking for, but structurally sound and cosmetically acceptable in low light. He welded a sleeve on the interior for reinforcement. It would hold. It would hold for a long time. The headlight assembly was the final problem. Ethan did not have the exact unit. He had a compatible unit from a different year that would mount to the damaged bracket with modification. The appearance would be slightly different, a trained eye would notice, but it would be a functional headlight mounted in the right place, and in the dark from a distance, it would look like a motorcycle that had a headlight, which was the minimum acceptable standard. He modified the bracket, he wired the unit in, he checked the beam alignment. At 2:17 in the morning, Ethan Walker stood back from the repaired motorcycle and looked at it. It wasn't the bike it had been before the crash. He would not pretend it was. The forks were solid, but slightly different spec. The tank had a ghost of the dent if the light hit right. The handlebars were a hair longer. The headlight wasn't original. The exhaust repair was visible if you knew what to look for and crouched at the right angle. But it was whole. It was functional. It would start. It would run. It would carry someone safely down the road. He picked up a clean rag and wiped down the tank. "Try to start it," he told Logan. Logan had been sitting quietly against the wall for the last hour, fighting off sleep. He got to his feet, his shoulders stiff, his knees sore, and walked to the bike. He settled onto the seat. He put the key in. He looked at Ethan for a moment. "Go ahead," Ethan said. Logan pressed the starter. The engine turned over once, twice, and caught. The exhaust note was slightly different. The modification changed the resonance, just a touch, but the engine ran smooth and strong. Logan sat on the idling motorcycle in the middle of the garage, and his face did something complicated. His jaw was set, but his eyes were wet. He put his hands on the repaired handlebars, and they shook slightly. "Hey," Ethan said. Logan looked up. "It's going to be okay." Ethan said it simply. The way you say a thing when you know it might not be true, but you mean it regardless. Logan nodded. He couldn't speak for a moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and came out with a watch, a good one, a Breitling or something close to it, the kind that cost several $1,000s. He held it out toward Ethan. "Take this," Logan said. "Please, at least take this." Ethan looked at the watch. He looked at Logan. "Put that away," he said. "Ethan," I said, "put it away." His voice was steady, not angry, just certain. "You've got somewhere you need to be before it gets light, and I've got work to clean up." He picked up the used rag from the workbench. "You remember how to get there from here?" Logan nodded slowly. "Shoulder's going to be sore for a week," Ethan said. "Keep it moving so it doesn't stiffen up, and ice it tonight." Logan shut the engine off, put the kickstand down, and stood. He was quiet for a moment, standing beside the repaired motorcycle, his hands at his sides. "I don't know how to—" He stopped, started over. "I'm going to come back. I need you to know that. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to pay you for this." "Okay," Ethan said, not discouraging it, not putting stock in it. "Just okay. I mean it." "I know you do." Ethan held the garage door open. "Go." Logan walked the bike out of the garage. He put on his helmet, which had survived the crash, scuffed but intact. He settled onto the seat one more time and started the engine. He looked back at Ethan through the open visor. He didn't say anything else. He just looked. Then he rode away. Ethan watched the tail light until it disappeared around the corner at the end of the block. He stood in the garage doorway in the 2:30 in the morning silence of a Bakersfield street and listened to the engine fade. When it was gone, the silence came back complete. He turned around. His shop was a disaster tools on every surface, parts spread across the floor, the lathe still running in the back before he switched it off. His own motorcycle sat in the corner with its front end gone, the forks, removed the wheel off the brake lines, disconnected. It looked like a carcass. It was not salvageable tonight. It might not be salvageable for a long time. The eviction notice was still on the desk under the rag. Ethan stood in the middle of the garage and looked at all of it. He was 38 years old and he had just spent 6 hours of unpaid labor repairing a stranger's motorcycle using parts from the most valuable thing he owned. And his shop was still going to close, and he was still going to have to find somewhere to put his tools, and he was still going to have to call his sister in Phoenix and tell her how things had turned out. He picked up a wrench that had fallen on the floor. He put it back on the pegboard. He picked up the next one. By 4 in the morning, the shop was clean. Every tool on its hook, every part swept or stored. The lathe turned off and the floor mopped and the garage door pulled down. He sat on the rolling stool one more time and put his hands on his knees. He didn't feel like a man who had made a mistake. He didn't feel like a man who had been taken advantage of. He felt actually, and this surprised him a little, given how the math looked like a man who had done the right thing, which was not going to pay the rent. But it was something. It was real. In a day that had contained mostly things that weren't going right, he had done one thing that was correct, and it had mattered to the person it was done for, and that had to count. He turned off the light. He locked the front door. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a while, too tired to drive, not quite ready to go home and face the quiet of his apartment. The sun was not up yet. The street was empty. The street light at the corner had stopped flickering sometime in the night and was either fixed or burned out in the dark. It was impossible to tell which. Ethan leaned his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes. He thought about his brother. He thought about Danny sitting in the common room of the group home in Modesto, watching a baseball game, laughing at something one of the staff said. He thought about Logan Carter riding through the dark streets of Bakersfield on a repaired motorcycle going back to wherever he needed to go before it got light. He thought about the bike sitting in pieces in the corner of his shop. He thought about the eviction notice. He didn't sleep. He just sat. After a while, the sky began to change at the edge of the horizon, not yet light, just less dark, the beginning of the process that eventually becomes morning. Ethan started the truck. He sat for one more moment with his hands on the steering wheel. Then he drove home. Ethan slept 3 hours and 20 minutes. He knew the exact number because he looked at his phone when he lay down on the couch. He hadn't made it to the bedroom. And he looked at it again when he woke up, not from an alarm, but from the particular stillness that settles into a person when they've gotten all the sleep their body is willing to allow. 3 hours and 20 minutes. His back ached from the work. His hands were stiff. The cut on his right palm he hadn't noticed making it sometime around midnight. Some edge he'd reached for in the dark had bled through the bandage he'd wrapped around it before leaving the shop. He lay on the couch and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he got up, rewrapped his hand, put on coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with his phone while the coffee brewed. He had 3 missed calls, 2 from an unknown number, the kind of back-to-back calling that suggested urgency, not a spam robot, and 1 from his sister in Phoenix. The unknown number had not left a voicemail. His sister had left 11 seconds of silence, followed by her saying, "Call me when you get this okay. It's not an emergency. I just want to talk." Which from Renee, in the particular tone she used on that recording, meant it was probably at least a little bit of an emergency, or at minimum something she'd been thinking about for a while and had decided tonight was the night to bring up. He didn't call her back yet. He poured the coffee. He drank half of it, standing at the counter. Then he put on his jacket and drove back to the shop. It was 7:15 in the morning. The street was thin with early traffic, a few commuters, a delivery truck pulling out of the convenience store parking lot 2 blocks down. The Central Valley in October had a particular quality of morning light, flat and wide and honest, no softness to it, just daylight arriving and getting straight to work. Ethan parked in front of the shop and sat in the truck for a moment before going inside. He'd known what he would find, of course. He'd left it there himself. But knowing something and seeing it again in morning light are different experiences. The parts of his Electroglide were laid out on the shop rag exactly as he'd left them. Forks, wheels, seals, brake lines, all arranged with the care he put into things automatically, a habit from years of working alone, where the only organizational system was the one inside your own head. The frame sat where it always sat, but stripped of its front end, it had a skeletal quality that was hard to look at without feeling something. He looked at it anyway. He thought it was important to look at it. Then he put on his work gloves and started on the accounts. This was not the work he loved, but it was the work that needed doing. He had 3 jobs in progress, a carburetor rebuild on a customer's Kawasaki that was 2/3 done, an oil system service on a touring bike that was almost finished, and a brake job on an older Honda that he'd been waiting on parts for. He worked through the Kawasaki first methodically, the familiar sequence of work, settling over him the way it always did, like putting on something worn and comfortable. His hands knew what to do without much direction from his brain, which meant his brain was free to work on the other problem. The other problem being 19 days. He could theoretically finish the 3 jobs in progress, collect what he was owed on them, and use that money plus whatever he could liquidate from the shop equipment to make a partial payment to the property management company and ask for an extension. He'd done the math the night before the eviction notice arrived, anticipating it. The number he could realistically put together in 19 days was somewhere between 60 and 70% of what he owed. Whether that was enough to buy more time depended entirely on whether the property management company saw any advantage in accepting it, and their recent communications suggested they did not. They had another tenant interested in the space, someone who'd pay more per square foot and require fewer conversations about late fees. He was finishing the last adjustment on the carburetor when he heard a vehicle slow down outside. He didn't look up immediately. Vehicles slowed down outside all the time. It was a commercial street. There was a stop sign 2 lots down. But then he heard the door and the footsteps on the concrete, and something in the specific quality of those footsteps, deliberate, unhurried the footsteps of someone who was not in a hurry because they didn't need to be made. Him set his tool down. The man who walked into the garage was not Logan. He was about 50 heavy through the shoulders and chest, with a face that had been lived in hard and kept its character from it. His hair was close cut and going silver at the temples. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he was not wearing a vest, but something about him communicated the same information that a vest would have communicated. He stood in the entrance of the garage and looked around the space with the calm, unhurried assessment of someone who measured every room they walked into. His eyes landed on Ethan. "You the owner," he said. "Yeah." Ethan set his tool down on the bench. "Shop's not open yet. Another half hour." The man nodded slowly. He didn't leave. "You did some work last night." It was not a question. Ethan kept his voice and his face even. "I work most nights. It's a repair shop." On a bike that wasn't exactly brought in the front door. The man's eyes moved to the parts of Ethan's electric light in the corner, then back to Ethan. He had very still eyes. Not cold, exactly, just still. The kind of still that meant he'd long since stopped being surprised by what he found in rooms. "A Harley. Came in beat to hell." Ethan didn't answer. "You're not in trouble," the man said. "I want to be clear about that before you get any ideas. I'm not here because anything went wrong. I'm here because my nephew told me what you did for him last night, and I wanted to see the man myself." The word nephew landed in the conversation and rearranged everything. Ethan looked at the man more carefully. "Logan's your nephew," he said. "Logan is my nephew." The man put out his hand. "Ray Delgado, I'm not chapter, I'm just family, but I know everyone that matters, and everyone that matters knows I'm here." He said it without emphasis, just laying down a fact. "Logan called me this morning around 5. Told me everything, the crash, the damage, and what you did to fix it." He paused. "And what you did to fix it." That second sentence had a different weight. Ethan understood that Ray had looked at the bike and could see the repair, could read it the way a person who understood motorcycles reads a repair. Could see where the original parts had come from. "It needed the right parts," Ethan said. "It needed parts you didn't have to give it," Ray said. "That's a different thing." He looked at the stripped frame in the corner for a moment. "That your project was." Ray nodded once. Something moved behind his expression, not pity, something more considered than that. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be straight with me. Okay? Why'd you do it? Not the repair of the parts. You could have fixed that bike with what you had, and it would have run, and it would have been fine, and nobody would have known the difference. But you used your own parts, your own bike." He looked at Ethan directly. "Why?" Ethan considered the question. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give it to Ray straight the way Ray had asked for it. "Because I don't build things to fail," he said. "And because the kid was scared and he'd done something that was actually right, even if the way he did it was wrong. And because I've been in a position where I needed somebody to step up, and not step up was what I got, and I remember what that costs." He met Ray's eyes. "That enough of an answer?" Ray was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "That's enough." He didn't leave immediately after that. He walked into the shop, not aggressively, not possessively, just with the ease of a man who moved through spaces without asking permission, and looked at the tools on the pegboard, the lift, the equipment, the 3 bikes in various stages of work. He looked at the eviction notice on the desk. He didn't comment on it. He spent about 90 seconds looking around in total, then he turned back to Ethan. "Somebody's gonna come see you," Ray said. "Probably not today, Maybe tomorrow, maybe day after. When they do, don't be nervous and don't be stupid. Just be what you are. He nodded toward the shop in general. You're good at your job. That matters to certain people. Then he left. Ethan stood in the middle of his garage for a long moment after Ray's truck pulled out. He picked up his tool. He went back to the Kawasaki carburetor. He finished the adjustment in 4 minutes and started it up, and it ran clean and smooth, and he stood listening to it for a while before shutting it back down. He did not ask himself what Ray Delgado had meant by somebody's going to come see you. He thought he understood well enough, and understanding it required him to think about what he was willing to do and not willing to do, and he'd always known the answer to that question because it wasn't really a question. He was a mechanic. He fixed motorcycles. He did it right and he did it honestly, and he charged what it cost him to survive. That was what he was, and it wasn't complicated. If that was what somebody was coming to see, they could come. His phone rang at 10:15, unknown number again. He answered it. Is this Ethan Walker? The voice was young, not Logan's voice, someone younger, or maybe just someone who sounded young. Yeah, who's this? I'm calling from Garrison Property Management. I'm following up on the notice we sent regarding the commercial lease at... I have the notice, Ethan said. Right. So we wanted to get a sense of... I'm going to stop you right there, Ethan said. I know what the notice says. I know what I owe. I don't have the full amount right now, and I won't have it in 19 days. He said it flat and clear, no apology in it, just accuracy. What I do have is a track record of 9 years in that space, 3 active plus, and a willingness to make a partial payment and negotiate a payment plan for the rest. If that's an option, I want to discuss it. If it's not, I'd appreciate you telling me directly so I can make plans accordingly. A pause on the other end. He could hear the click of a keyboard. I'll need to take that to the director, the voice said. That's fine. You have my number. He hung up. He stood for a moment, phone in his hand. Then he called Renee. She answered on the second ring. Ethan? Hey, I got your voicemail. What's going on? Nothing's going on my end. I wanted to call. How are you? The way she said it meant she knew something was wrong or close to wrong and was trying to create an opening for him to tell her. I'm okay, he said. Ethan. I mean it. I'm actually okay. He sat down on the stool. I'm having some business problems. You probably figured that out. But I did something last night that was right, and I'm holding on to that. He thought for a second about how to say the rest of it. You know how sometimes you don't know why you do things until after you've done them, and then it's clear? Yeah, Renee said carefully. I know that. Last night was like that. Okay. A pause. Can you tell me about the business problems? Not yet. I will. Just not yet. Okay, she said again. Her voice had a steady quality to it that was one of the things he loved most about her. She didn't push, she just stayed. Call me if you need to. I will. And go eat something. You sound like you haven't eaten. He'd forgotten about eating. He glanced at the protein bar wrapper on the workbench. Logan's half-eaten bar from the night before and thought about the last time he'd actually had a meal. Yesterday lunch. Yeah, I'll get something. He got a breakfast burrito from the cart that parked outside the auto parts store on Tuesdays and Thursdays and ate it standing up at his own workbench, looking at his phone. No call back from Garrison Property Management. Nothing from Logan. Nothing from the unknown number that had called twice this morning. He finished the oil service on the touring bike by noon and the brake job on the Honda by 2:30, which left him with the parts on order for a vintage Triumph restoration that he'd been excited about 3 weeks ago and now mostly just viewed as money that would arrive too late to matter. He photographed the completed job, sent invoices, and called the customers. Both customers came in by 4. Both paid in cash. Both shook his hand. The touring bike customer, a retired postal worker named Gerald, who'd been bringing his machines to Ethan for 6 years, lingered at the door after collecting his keys. You okay? Gerald said. He had a direct way of asking things that Ethan had always respected. Working on it, Ethan said. Gerald looked at the shop for a moment. He looked at the eviction notice on the desk. Ethan had stopped bothering to hide it under the rag. You need a character reference for a loan, a new landlord, anything like that, because I'll write one. I'll call somebody. Whatever helps. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest and then release. I appreciate that, Gerald. I'll let you know. Gerald nodded. He went out and Ethan heard the touring bike start up in the parking lot. the big engine settling into its rhythm and then the sound of it pulling away. The afternoon went quiet. Ethan cleaned tools he'd already cleaned. He reorganized a parts cabinet that was already organized. He was doing the thing he did when he was trying not to think about something staying in motion, keeping his hands busy, making order in small spaces, because the larger space was disorderly in ways he couldn't reach. At 5:47, he heard the motorcycles, not one, not two. He'd heard multiple bikes pulling into his lot before riding groups friends, rolling in together the occasional informal club meet. This was different in its volume before he could see it different in the way the sound built steadily, rather than arriving all at once. He walked to the garage door and looked out. There were 11 motorcycles. He counted twice to be sure, 11 Harleys, all big displacement touring models, entering his parking lot in a loose formation that tightened as they slowed to a stop. The engine shut down in sequence one after another until the silence was abrupt and total. It arrived with a weight to it. Ethan stood in the garage door. 11 men, all wearing black leather vests with the same patch on the back. He could read the patch from where he stood, the shape of it, the top rocker, the center logo, the bottom rocker. He didn't need to be close to identify it. The Hells Angels patch had a specific visual signature that was not difficult to recognize. They dismounted without hurry. They didn't come toward him immediately. There was a casual quality to the way they moved that Ethan recognized as deliberate a performance of relaxation that communicated without any explicit statement that they were exactly where they intended to be, and they intended to stay as long as they chose. One man walked forward. He was the oldest in the group, mid-50s, Ethan estimated, with gray at his beard, and a physical solidity that came from decades of physical life rather than a gym. He walked the way Ray Delgado had walked, with that same unhurried certainty, but with something additional, an authority that didn't need announcing. He stopped a few feet from Ethan and looked at him without speaking for a moment. "You Ethan Walker," he said. "Yeah, Marcus Reynolds." He did not extend his hand immediately. He just looked at Ethan with a direct, assessing gaze that was not unfriendly, but was not casual either. "We need to see the bike." Ethan stepped aside. Marcus walked into the garage. The other men stayed outside, loosely, not crowding the entrance, just present. Marcus walked to where the repaired Harley Logan's motorcycle was parked against the far wall. Ethan had not moved it since Logan had left early that morning. He'd been waiting to hear what happened next, and now here was what happened next. Marcus crouched next to the motorcycle. He looked at the fork assembly, first ran his thumb along the lower leg where the new tube met the old hardware. He looked at the headlight mounting. He put his hand on the tank and moved it slightly, feeling the repaired section. He looked at the exhaust. He spent a full 2 minutes examining the bike at close range without saying anything. Then he stood up. "Where'd the fork tubes come from?" he said. "My own bike." Marcus looked at him. "I had a compatible set. The spec was right. I needed the right seals and the right oil grade, and I had them on my Electroglide." Ethan nodded toward the parts on the shop rag. "It's sitting without its front end now. Those are the original parts from your bike laid out by number." Marcus looked at the laid out parts. He looked at the stripped Electroglide in the corner. He looked back at Ethan. "You took your own bike apart to fix this one," he said. "The repair needed to be done right. You could have used what you had." "No," Ethan said. "Not and have it be right." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at one of the other men, a broad, red-haired man with a copper beard near the garage entrance, and something passed between them that wasn't spoken. "Logan told us you wouldn't take money," Marcus said. "He offered his watch. I didn't need his watch. He said you told him to make better choices." Marcus's expression didn't shift. "That's what Logan said. Those were your words." "Pretty much, yeah." "He's 23 years old," Marcus said. "He's got a lot of choices still to make." Something moved in the older man's face. Not softness, ewakiling, but something that acknowledged the complexity of knowing a young person, of watching them operate in the world and not being able to do it for them. "He did right by his sister. I want you to know that. The reason he took the bike, his sister needed him, and he went. That's not nothing." "I know," Ethan said. "He told me. She's my niece, too." Marcus's voice was flat. "Her situation that's being handled. Separately." He said the last word in a way that closed the subject entirely. Ethan didn't ask. "The bike can be ridden," Marcus said. "Yes, I'd give the welds on the exhaust another 24 hours before you put serious highway miles on it, just to let the repair settle fully. but it'll run. It runs well. Marcus nodded. He walked around the bike one more time slowly, and then he stopped on the other side of it and looked at Ethan across the seat. "What's happening with your shop?" he said. Ethan had not expected the question. He held Marcus's gaze for a moment. "I'm working on it. I saw the notice on your desk. Then you know what's happening with my shop. How long have you been here?" 9 years. Good reputation. Ethan felt the edge of something, and the question had a direction to it that he couldn't fully see yet. "I do good work," he said. "I've got customers that have been coming here for years. I charge what things cost, and I don't make things up to pad a bill." He paused. "If that's a reputation, then yeah." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked around the shop again, not the way Ray had looked around it assessing, but differently, like he was making measurements that weren't physical. "I have a proposition," Marcus said. Ethan said nothing. He waited. "My chapter has 12 bikes in regular rotation, full-time riders. Those bikes need service, real service, not dealership oil change service. They break down, they need rebuilds, they need custom work. They need someone who knows what they're looking at and tells you the truth about what's wrong instead of telling you what runs up the biggest bill." He folded his arms. "We've been using a shop over in Shafter. Man retired last year. The new guy's competent, but he's not—" He stopped. Chose a different word. "He's not this." "What's this?" Ethan said. Marcus looked at him steadily. "You know what this is? You know what you did last night and why you did it, and you know that most people wouldn't." He let that sit for a second. "We bring you our 12 bikes full service. We pay full rate. We pay on time. Word gets out that Walker's is our preferred shop, and word does get out, you'll have more business than you've had in 2 years. Riders talk, especially when they trust the recommendation." Ethan looked at the man across the motorcycle. He thought about what this was and what it wasn't. He thought about the question he'd been asking himself since Ray Delgado left that morning, what he was willing to do and not willing to do. He thought about the answer he'd already known. "I need to ask you something straight," Ethan said. "Go ahead. The work you're talking about, is it just motorcycles? Because that's what I do. I fix motorcycles. That's all I do. I don't get involved in anything that isn't a bike on a lift or a part in my hand. That's not judgment, that's just what I am." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You think I'd come to a man whose whole value is that he's straight and then ask him to be crooked?" There was something in his voice that wasn't quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "I need a mechanic. I've got 12 bikes that need one. That's the whole conversation." "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay, you'll think about it," or "Okay, we have a deal." Ethan looked at his shop. He looked at the eviction notice on the desk. He looked at the stripped Electra Glide in the corner. He thought about Gerald offering to write a character reference. He thought about Renee telling him to go eat something. He thought about 3 hours and 20 minutes of sleep and a hand that was still bleeding through its bandage. Then he thought about the way Logan Carter's face had looked when the engine caught. "I need something from you first," Ethan said. Marcus waited. "The building, the lease. If I'm going to be your preferred shop, I need to know I still have a shop in a month. Because right now, I don't." He met Marcus's eyes directly. "I'm not asking you to bail me out. I'm asking you to be straight with me about whether this is a real offer or a temporary arrangement. Because I can't build anything on temporary." Marcus was quiet. Then he looked at the red-haired man again, that same unspoken exchange, and then back to Ethan. "What do you owe?" Marcus said. 4 months commercial rent, plus the penalty fees." "How much total?" Ethan told him the number. He said it without flinching or qualifying it, just the number the way Ray had asked him for straight. Marcus absorbed it. He didn't react to the dollar amount. He just processed it with the same still expression he'd used for everything else. "The building's owned by a Sacramento property company," Ethan said. "They've got another tenant interested." "I know who owns it," Marcus said. "Or I can find out in 20 minutes, which is the same thing." He looked at Ethan for a long moment. "Let me ask you something in return. You said you fixed that bike because it needed to be done right, not because of what you'd get out of it, not because of who owned it, just because it needed to be done right. Yeah. Do you think that kind of man deserves to lose his shop because of a property company in Sacramento?" "I think what I deserve and what happens to me aren't always the same thing," Ethan said. "That's been true my whole life." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah." He said it like Ethan had confirmed something. That's been true for most people I've ever respected. He turned and walked toward the garage entrance. He stopped at the threshold and spoke without turning around. Get some sleep tonight, Marcus said. You look like you've been awake for 2 days. Close. Someone will be in touch about the lease situation before end of business tomorrow. He paused. Not someone, me. He said it like a fact, not a promise, and the distinction mattered. And Walker, Ethan looked at him. The bike's good work, Marcus said. I've been riding Harleys for 30 years, and I know good work when I look at it. Don't let anyone tell you different. Then he walked out. Ethan stood in the middle of his garage and listened to 11 Harley-Davidson motorcycles start up in sequence in his parking lot. The sound built into something enormous, vibrating through the floor, through his chest. He closed his eyes for a second. The engines settled into their rolling idle, and then one by one pulled out of the lot and into the street, and the sound faded in the direction of the highway. When it was gone, the silence came back. But it was a different kind of silence than it had been before they arrived. He stood in it for a while. He looked at the eviction notice on the desk. For the first time in 11 days, he didn't look at it with the feeling that it was the final word on something. He looked at it with the feeling that it was a problem in a sequence of problems, and that sequences had turning points, and that he might be standing just past the turning point without yet being able to see clearly what was on the other side. He rewrapped his hand. He replaced the bandage with a clean one from the first aid kit. He put on a fresh pot of coffee. He sat at the workbench with a cup and his phone, and he called Danny. Danny picked up on the fourth ring. Hey, Ethan said, it's me. Ethan. Danny's voice was good, lucid, warm, the version of his brother that Ethan loved and was always relieved to find. I was thinking about you today. The Giants had a good game. Yeah, who'd they play? Colorado. Scored 5 in the 7th. That's good. Real good. A pause. You sound tired. I had a long night. Working. Yeah, a repair job. Ethan looked at the shop, at the parts on the rag, at the stripped frame in the corner. A hard one, but it came out right. That's good, Danny said. When you fix something right, that feels good. Yeah, Ethan said. It really does. They talked for 20 minutes. Danny told him about the baseball game, about a staff member at the group home named Patricia, who'd brought in homemade tamales for dinner, about a peon that had wandered into the courtyard that afternoon and spent 2 hours sitting with the residents before someone came to collect it. He told these stories with the simple, genuine pleasure of someone reporting on the good parts of a day. And Ethan listened to all of it and did not check his phone and did not think about the eviction notice or Marcus Reynolds or the number he'd said out loud for the first time. When they hung up, Ethan sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he got up, went to the corner, and put the canvas cover back over his Electroglide. It was still in pieces. The front end was still gone, but he put the cover back over it because what was under the cover was still his, and he intended to keep it that way. He smoothed the edge of the canvas down and stepped back. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, different unknown number than the calls from this morning. Just 7 words. Lease situation will be resolved. Rest well. No name, no other information. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. He read it twice. He set the phone face down on the workbench and picked up his coffee cup. He drank the last of the coffee, which had gone cold without him noticing. He washed the cup in the shop sink. He dried it and put it back on the shelf. He locked the front door. He turned off the lights. He drove home in the dark, and this time he ate something, a real meal, eggs and toast, sitting at his kitchen table under the overhead light. And then he went to bed properly in the bedroom, and he slept for 7 hours without interruption, which was more sleep than he'd had in a single stretch in the last 2 months. In the morning, he would find out what resolve meant. Tonight, he'd done enough. The call came at 8:14 in the morning. Ethan had been up since 6:30. He'd made coffee, eaten actual breakfast for the second day in a row, a small victory that felt larger than it was, and driven to the shop with the specific intention of doing real work and not sitting around waiting for things to happen to him. He had the Triumph restoration to prep for a walk-in he'd scheduled for a tire swap and the ongoing project of figuring out what to do about his Electroglide now that it was missing its front end. He was going to be useful. He was going to work. He was not going to check his phone every 4 minutes. He checked his phone every 4 minutes. At 8:14, it rang, and the number on the screen was the same property management number that had called him 2 mornings ago. The Sacramento number, the Garrison property management number, the number attached to the company that had sent the eviction notice and had another tenant lined up and had given him no particular reason to expect good news. He answered it on the second ring. "Mr. Walker." It was a different voice than before, older male, with the brisk efficiency of someone senior enough not to need pleasantries. "This is David Garrison. I own the company." Ethan stood still. "Mr. Garrison? I'm calling because we've had a change in circumstances regarding your property." A pause, not dramatic, just the pause of a man reading from something while he talked. "We've received an offer on the building itself. A purchase offer, not a lease inquiry, which changes the situation significantly." Ethan's chest tightened. A purchase offer was not obviously good news. A purchase offer on the building he rented could mean he was about to be informed that he had even less time than 19 days. "I see," he said, keeping his voice level. "The purchaser has made clear that their intention is to maintain the current tenancy," Garrison said. "Meaning you. They've stipulated it as a condition of sale that your lease be honored and extended at current rate for a minimum of 3 years with renewal options." Another pause. "They've also indicated they'll be absorbing the outstanding balance on your account as part of the transaction. The back rent, the penalties." He said this in the tone of someone reporting a fact he finds mildly unusual. "All of it." The garage was very quiet. "Who's the purchaser?" Ethan said. "An LLC. Mojave Iron Holdings." Garrison sounded like a man who had made calls like this before but rarely found them this straightforward. "They have submitted a clean offer proof of funds, no financing contingency. Frankly, Mr. Walker, it's an uncomplicated transaction, and we intend to accept it." A brief hesitation. "I wanted to call you personally because, well, it's not often a tenant situation resolves this cleanly. You should know where you stand." Ethan sat down on the rolling stool. He hadn't realized he needed to sit until he was sitting. "Mojave Iron Holdings," he said. "That's correct. Do you know the entity?" "No," Ethan said, which was technically true. He did not know the entity. He had a strong hypothesis about the people behind it, and hypotheses were not knowledge. "Well, your new landlord will be in contact about the formal lease extension. I expect you'll hear from them by end of week." Garrison's voice relaxed slightly. A transaction completing cleanly was apparently satisfying even to the man receiving less than he might have gotten from a different tenant. "I'll say this. You've been a reliable tenant for 9 years. We should have been more flexible earlier. That's on us." It was the closest thing to an apology that a property management company had probably ever offered Ethan Walker, and he received it with the same quiet dignity he received most things. "I appreciate the call," he said. He sat on the stool for a full 3 minutes after hanging up, holding the phone, looking at the eviction notice on the desk. Then he got up, walked to the desk, picked up the notice, folded it once, and put it in the trash can under the workbench. He stood there. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He laughed. Bow. Not a big laugh, not a performance of relief, just a real sound that came up from somewhere involuntary and surprised him with itself. He pressed his hand over his mouth and stood in his garage and laughed for about 5 seconds. Then he got back to work. The tire swap walk-in arrived at 9, a young woman named Carla, who rode a well-maintained street glide and knew exactly what she wanted, which Ethan respected. She watched him work with the focused attention of someone who understood what was happening mechanically and was evaluating it. About 20 minutes in, she said, "You're Walker, right? The guy Marcus Reynolds mentioned." Ethan looked up. "Marcus mentioned me to you." "To a few people," she said. "Word travels fast in this community. People are saying you're the most honest shop in the valley." She said it simply, not as flattery, just as information. Marcus doesn't say things like that about people. So people pay attention when he does. Ethan finished torquing the wheel. "When did you hear this?" "This morning. Group chat." She shrugged. "I was going to come in anyway. My regular shop's backed up 3 weeks. But when I saw Marcus's message, I moved it up." Ethan stood and checked the tire pressure. He handed her the keys. She paid in full, tipped him $20. He tried to refuse, she wouldn't let him, and rode out. He stood at the garage door and watched her go, and thought about Marcus Reynolds sending a message in a group chat that morning, while Ethan was eating breakfast, while Ethan was deciding not to check his phone every 4 minutes and then checking it every 4 minutes. Marcus had been in a group chat talking about Walker's motorcycle repair. The next customer arrived at 11, then another at 1:30. By 2 in the afternoon, he had 3 appointments scheduled for the following week, 2 of them. First-time customers who'd heard about him from someone who'd heard it from someone. The phone rang twice. He wrote down names and bike models and problems and scheduled them in the book he kept by the register. The shop felt different. Not physically, nothing had changed, the same cracked concrete, the same flickering light in the back that he kept meaning to replace, the same rolling tool chest with the dent on the lower left corner from the time he'd backed the lift into it in 2019. But the feeling inside it had shifted, like pressure equalizing, like a room that had been holding its breath exhaling. He was deep into the Triumph prep work parts laid out on the bench in the sequence he'd installed them when he heard the motorcycle pull in at 3:20. He recognized the bike before he recognized the rider. The repaired Harley, his own fork tubes gleaming in the afternoon light, the slightly different headlight, the exhaust with his weld work visible at the right angle. He recognized his own repair, the way you recognize something you made with your hands, an intimate recognition that's partly pride and partly accountability. Logan Carter parked and swung off the bike and walked into the garage, and he looked different than he had 2 nights ago. The cut on his cheek was healing cleanly. It would leave a small scar, the kind that fades to nearly invisible in a few years. His shoulder was still carried carefully, held slightly higher than the other. But the fear that had been in his face the night of the crash was gone, replaced by something more composed. He'd slept. He'd gotten to the other side of the worst of it. He stopped in front of Ethan. "Hey," Logan said. "Hey, the bike runs great." "I know it does." Logan nodded. He looked at the shop for a moment, the new appointments in the book, the bikes in the bays, the energy of a place that was working. "I heard about the building." "Yeah. Was that—" He stopped. "Did Marcus do that?" "I don't know who Mojave Iron Holdings is," Ethan said carefully. Logan looked at him for a second, and then something crossed his face that might have been a smile, but was too complicated to be just that. "Right." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and came out with an envelope. He held it out toward Ethan. "Before you say no, Bob," Logan said, "this isn't for the repair. I know you won't take money for the repair, and I'm not going to fight you on that again. This is different." Ethan looked at the envelope. "What is it?" "It's from my sister. Her name's Kayla. She's 19 and she's the most stubborn person I know, which is saying something because I'm pretty stubborn." His voice was steady, but there was something careful around the edges of it. "She wanted to write you a letter. She said she needed you to understand what that night meant, not just the bike, all of it, me getting to her. What might have happened if I hadn't." He held the envelope out further. "She addressed it to the mechanic who helped her brother. She didn't know your name yet." Ethan took the envelope. He didn't open it in front of Logan. He set it on the workbench. "How is she?" Ethan said. "She's staying with me for now. We found her an apartment, small place, but it's hers, and she's got a job interview next week. Logan stopped. "She cried when I told her what you did. She said she wanted to meet you." "She should focus on the apartment and the interview," Ethan said. "That's the important thing." "She said you'd say something like that." "She doesn't know me." "She knows the kind of person you are," Logan said. "That's enough." He put his hands in his pockets. "I also came because Marcus asked me to give you something." He reached back into the jacket and came out with a folded card, business card, weight plain, with a number written on it in pen. "That's his personal number." He said, "If you ever have a problem, not a business problem, any kind of problem, you call that number. He'll answer." Ethan looked at the card. "He doesn't give that out," Logan said. "I want you to understand that. The number he gives to business contacts and people he works with, that's different. That's not this number." Ethan set the card on the workbench next to the envelope. "Tell him thank you," Ethan said. "You can tell him yourself. He's coming by Friday." Ethan looked up. Logan's expression was neutral, but his eyes were doing something specific, delivering information while staying carefully out of the way of Ethan's reaction to it. "He wants to talk about the service arrangement for the chapter bikes." He said he started the conversation but didn't finish it. "He started it," Ethan confirmed. "He wants to finish it. Friday works." Logan nodded. He turned to go, then turned back. "One more thing." He reached into his jacket a third time and produced a folded piece of paper. Not an envelope, just a folded sheet. He held it out. "The guys in the chapter took up a collection. For your bike, the Electra Glide." He said it fast before Ethan could interrupt. It's not charity. They all looked at what you did. Marcus showed them the repair of the fork tubes. All of it, and they decided that a mechanic who strips his own machine to fix someone else's deserves to have his machine put back together. It's not charity. It's them saying they understand what it cost you. Ethan did not take the paper. Logan held it steady. If you don't take it, you're telling them their gesture means nothing. That's not Ethan. These are men who take pride seriously. Refusing this isn't humble. It's disrespectful to what they're trying to do. The garage was quiet for a moment. Ethan took the paper. He didn't unfold it. He set it on the workbench with the envelope and the card. Tell them thank you, he said. Tell them yourself Friday, Logan said. Some of them will be here. He left. Ethan heard the Harley start his fork tubes, his seals, his work, and pull out of the lot. He stood at the bench and looked at the three things lined up there. The letter from a 19-year-old girl who called him the mechanic who helped her brother, the personal phone number of Marcus Reynolds, and a folded piece of paper that was going to tell him a number when he opened it, and whatever that number was, it was going to be people saying, "We see you." He opened the letter first. He read it standing up, and he did not summarize or paraphrase it to himself later, even in his own memory. Some things you receive whole and keep whole. What Kayla Carter had written to the mechanic who helped her brother was one of those things. When he finished it, he folded it back along its original creases and put it in the chest pocket of his work shirt. He left it there for the rest of the day. He could feel it against his chest while he worked, a slight pressure, a small weight. He opened the folded paper last. The number inside it was not a small number. It was more than the fork tubes were worth. It was more than the seals and the oil, law, and the labor hours. It was a number that included the math and then added something extra that wasn't math. He stood looking at it for a while, and he thought about what Logan had said about pride and respect, and he folded the paper back up and put it in his shirt pocket alongside Kayla's letter. He went back to work. At 4:50, the phone rang again. This time the number was local, a Bakersfield prefix, and when he answered it, the voice was a man's middle-aged with the specific tone of someone who wasn't used to making calls like this and was doing it anyway because he'd decided it was necessary. Is this Walker's Motorcycle Repair? It is. My name's Tom Briggs. I ride with a group out of the Kern River area. We've got 6 guys, all touring bikes, all Harleys, except one BMW. We've been looking for a new shop since our guy in Shafter retired. A pause. I heard your name from Marcus Reynolds' group. I don't know Reynolds personally, but a friend does, and the recommendation was it was a strong one. Another pause. Do you take new clients? Yes, Ethan said. I take new clients. They talked for 15 minutes. Tom Briggs' group needed full annual services on 6 machines, plus 2 of them had specific issues that required diagnostic work. By the time they hung up, Ethan had the 6 bikes scheduled across the next 2 weeks at staggered appointment times that would let him give each one the attention it deserved. He put the phone down and looked at the appointment book. 2 weeks ago, it had been largely empty. Today, it had more ink in it than it had in the previous 2 months combined. He was not naive about what had made this happen. A phone call Marcus Reynolds had made to a group chat. A word passed from writer to writer through a network that was apparently both extensive and efficient. Ethan Walker had not done anything different than he'd done for 9 years. He had not changed his prices or his approach or his standards. What had changed was visibility. Someone with credibility in a specific community had pointed at his shop and said, "This is the place. This is the man." He thought about whether that made him uncomfortable. He sat with the discomfort tested, it turned it over. What he landed on was this: the recommendation was honest. Marcus had seen the work. Marcus had looked at the repair and understood what it meant and what it got and why it had been done the way it had been done. The referrals coming in were based on a true thing, not a manufactured thing. The work he did was real. If more people found out about it because of a phone call from a man who had reason to trust it, that was not corruption. That was how trust worked in the world. It moved through people. He was locking up at 6 when the SUV pulled into the lot. He didn't recognize it. A black Chevrolet Suburban, clean government plate adjacent, but not government plates, something in the private sector range. The driver was a man he'd never seen 30s in a jacket, the contained energy of someone who worked in corporate infrastructure. The passenger who got out first was a man in his 50s wearing a sport coat over an open collar shirt And he walked toward Ethan with the specific confidence of someone who was accustomed to being the most important person at whatever meeting he was attending. "Mr. Walker," the man said. "Yeah. My name is Philip Sauer. I represent Inland Development Partners." He offered a business card which Ethan took. "We've been in discussions with Garrison Property Management about the building you occupy. I understand there's been a change in those discussions as of this morning." Ethan looked at the card, then at Sauer. "The building sold. A letter of intent has been submitted, yes, but a letter of intent is not a binding sale." Sauer's voice was professionally pleasant, the voice of a man who delivered unwelcome news for a living and had refined the delivery to something that sounded almost reasonable. "We represent the party that was previously in discussions to acquire the space. We have an active development interest in this corridor commercial redevelopment, higher density retail use, and we'd like to discuss whether there's a path forward that addresses everyone's needs." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "There isn't," Ethan said. Sauer blinked a small blink, the blink of a man who had prepared for a longer conversation. "I understand that change is sudden, but if you'd be willing to hear—" "I'm not the right person to talk to," Ethan said. "The building isn't mine. I'm a tenant. You want to talk to whoever bought it. We're aware of Mojave Iron Holdings. We've attempted to make contact." Something shifted in Sauer's pleasant expression, a slight tightening at the corners. "They've been unavailable for comment." Ethan thought about Marcus Reynolds and 11 Harley-Davidson motorcycles in his parking lot, and the weight of that silence after the engine shut off. He thought about the word unavailable and what it meant when applied to a man who'd given him his personal number and said, "Call me if you have any kind of problem." "I'm sorry I can't help you," Ethan said, "but I need to close up." "Mr. Walker, if you're concerned about the transition, your lease, your continuity, we can discuss arrangements that would—" "My lease is being extended," Ethan said. 3 years current rate. It was stipulated in the sale. He watched Sauer's expression process this. "So I'm not concerned. I'm just trying to close up." Sauer stood for a moment. His driver had stayed by the SUV, hands clasped, watching. The late afternoon was going orange and flat across the parking lot, and Ethan stood in his own doorway, keys in his hand, having the very straightforward experience of watching a man realize that what he'd come for was not available. "If your circumstances change," Sauer said, "we'd welcome a conversation." "Okay," Ethan said, not agreeing, just acknowledging. Sauer got back in the SUV. The Suburban pulled out and turned south and was gone. Ethan locked the door. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking south down the street where the SUV had gone. He thought about development interest and higher density retail use and what those words actually meant when applied to a neighborhood that had been slowly emptying out for years. He thought about the other shops on his block, the Vietnamese restaurant 2 doors down, that had been there since the 90s, the shoe repair place on the corner, the dry cleaner. He thought about what replaced them when people with commercial redevelopment interests arrived. He didn't feel good about Sauer or what Sauer represented, but it wasn't his fight to fight. His fight was the shop he was locking up, and that fight had just gotten considerably more winnable. He drove to the grocery store on the way home. He bought real food, vegetables, protein things that required actual preparation rather than unwrapping. He stood in the produce section for a while longer than necessary just looking at things. It was a profoundly ordinary activity, and he had not done it in weeks because weeks of budget anxiety collapse your world to its smallest possible perimeter. And a grocery store's produce section is somehow never inside that perimeter. He cooked dinner. It took 40 minutes and required him to find things in his kitchen that he'd forgotten he owned, including a cast iron pan and a bottle of olive oil that was somehow not expired. He ate at the table. He didn't look at his phone. After dinner, he opened the folded piece of paper again and looked at the number. He thought about the Electroglots in the corner of the shop, the canvas cover he'd smoothed down over it, the frame sitting there waiting. He thought about the forks he'd transferred over his work, his care now on a different machine, doing exactly what they'd been designed to do. He thought about whether it bothered him. It didn't. He found checking honestly that it genuinely didn't. The parts were doing their job. The bike they'd come from would get other parts. Better parts, parts chosen specifically rather than available. And the machine would be rebuilt on the other side of all of this, and it would be rebuilt. Right? The same way everything he touched was rebuilt, right? Because that was what he was. He went to bed at 10:30. He did not set an alarm, which was unusual for him. He almost always set an alarm. Had since his 20s the habitual anxiety of a man who ran his own business and could not afford to be late for anything. But tonight he put the phone on the nightstand face down and let the morning come when it came. It came at 6:40, which was earlier than he'd have chosen, but not unreasonable. He lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the neighborhood sounds, a truck on the street, someone's lawn sprinklers running, the distant bark of a dog that quickly stopped. The sounds of a normal morning doing what normal mornings do. He thought about Friday. Marcus was coming Friday to finish the conversation they'd started, to put actual structure around what 12 bikes in regular service rotation meant for Walker's motorcycle repair, to make real what had been a statement of intent 2 days ago. Ethan had 2 days to think about what questions he wanted to ask, in what terms he needed, and what he was prepared to offer in return. He was not afraid of the meeting. That was the thing he noticed lying there in the morning, checking himself honestly. He had been afraid of things for long enough, the rent, the bills, the slow diminishment of everything he'd built, that the absence of that specific fear felt like a physical change, like something that had been pressing on him from the outside was no longer there. He still had problems. He would always have problems. That was the nature of running a small business and being a person in the world. But the fear that his whole life was about to close up, that particular fear was gone. He got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. He opened his phone and went to his contacts and found Danny's number and started a text, then stopped and called instead because Danny liked phone calls more than texts, and Ethan was in the mood to hear his brother's voice. Danny answered on the third ring, groggy but warm. "It's early," Danny said. "I know, I just wanted to talk." A pause, then Danny's voice shifted to something more awake, something attentive. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is okay," Ethan said. "That's why I called. I wanted to tell you that." Yeah, things are better than they were." He looked at the kitchen window, the morning light coming through. "The shop is going to be okay. I think it's going to be better than okay." He heard Danny take a breath. "That's good, Ethan. That's real good." "I know," he paused. "You remember when I told you about the accident on the highway the night nobody stopped for you?" Danny was quiet for a moment. Some days he remembered it fully. Some days it was a fragment. "I remember some of it," he said carefully. "I met someone this week," Ethan said, "a young guy who needed help, and I stopped. I helped him." He wasn't sure exactly why he was saying this. It wasn't the kind of thing he usually talked about, but this morning it felt important to say out loud. "I think it changed things. I don't fully understand how yet, but I think it mattered." "Of course it mattered," Danny said with the simple certainty of someone who didn't overthink the things that didn't need overthinking. "You stopped. That always matters." Ethan sat with that for a second. "Yeah," he said, "it does." They talked for half an hour about the baseball standings, about Patricia's tamales, about a documentary Danny had watched about the Pacific Coast Highway that he described in such detail that Ethan could picture the whole thing without having seen it. By the time they hung up, Ethan was on his second cup of coffee, and the morning was fully established, and the day was waiting. He got to the shop at 8. There were 2 people already in the parking lot. One was Tom Briggs, who'd called yesterday about the 6-bike group. He was early for a walk-in assessment and apologized for not calling first, and Ethan told him it wasn't a problem and meant it. The other was a woman in her 60s who'd driven 40 minutes from Porterville because her Sportster had a throttle response issue that 2 other shops had diagnosed incorrectly. And she'd heard from her nephew's girlfriend's father that long a chain that Walker's was the place. He worked both of them in sequence efficiently without rushing either job. Tom's assessment took 20 minutes and confirmed what Tom had suspected. One of the 6 bikes had a developing transmission issue that needed attention before it became a serious problem, and Ethan scheduled it in priority. The woman from Porterville's throttle issue turned out to be a vacuum leak at the intake manifold, which he found in 8 minutes and fixed in 25. And when she asked how much, she looked ready for a number that would justify her 40-minute drive. And when he told her the actual number, she looked at him like he'd made a mistake. "That's it," she said. "That's it. The last shop charged me $200 and didn't fix it." "The last shop didn't find the vacuum leak," Ethan said. "Finding the right thing is most of the job." She paid him and tipped him and said she'd be back, and he believed her, and that was that. The day continued that way. Steady, purposeful, one problem at a time, each one addressed correctly and completely and sent back into the world fixed. This was what Ethan Walker did. This was at its fundamental core what he'd always done. The world around it had been complicated and frightening, for long enough that he'd nearly forgotten how clarifying it felt to simply be good at the thing he was built to do. At 2 in the afternoon between appointments, he went to the corner of the shop and pulled the canvas cover off the Electroglide. He stood and looked at it, the stripped front end, the frame waiting for what came next. He put his hand on the headstock and felt the metal solid patient unchanged. He thought about what came next. He picked up his phone and called a parts supplier he'd worked with for years, a man in Riverside who specialized in vintage Harley components and occasionally had pieces that shouldn't exist in the condition they were in. "I need some forks," Ethan said when the man picked up. "87 Electroglide stock spec. What have you got?" The supplier laughed. "You finally pulling the trigger on that glide." "Something like that," Ethan said. "Yeah." He listened to the inventory. He asked the right questions. He wrote down numbers and part conditions and prices. By the time he hung up, he had a clear picture of what the rebuild would cost and roughly how long it would take and what he needed to source in what order. He put the canvas cover back over the frame, not out of sadness this time, out of the simple practicality of protecting something you were going to return to. He smoothed the edge down, same as he'd done 2 nights ago, and stepped back. Friday was 2 days away. There was work to do before then. Jobs to finish, appointments to run logistics, to think through for what a sustained service relationship with 12 bikes actually looked like, in terms of scheduling and parts sourcing, and the extra hours it would probably require in the first few months. There were practical things, real things, the unglamorous infrastructure of a small business that had just gotten a genuine second chance. He went back to the bench. He picked up his tools. He got to work. And somewhere in the middle of a brake line inspection on a 2019 Road King with the radio on low and the afternoon light changing in the garage, and 3 new names in the appointment book, Ethan Walker registered quietly without ceremony, in the way that true things tend to arrive, that the shop was not closing. The shop was not closing. He kept working. Thursday passed the way good days pass when you're not used to having them, fast, full, slightly unreal at the edges, like something you keep expecting to be interrupted. Ethan ran 4 appointments. He diagnosed a persistent oil leak on a softail that 2 other mechanics had misidentified, finding the actual source in a cracked primary cover gasket that was hiding under a secondary leak from a loose drain plug, the kind of diagnostic layering that required patience and sequence, and the willingness to not stop at the first answer. He rebuilt a set of brake calipers on a customer's touring bike and spent an extra 40 minutes cleaning the pistons to a standard beyond what the job required, because that was how he worked and he didn't know another way. He did an annual service on a Sportster belonging to a retired firefighter named Walt, who talked the entire time about a fishing trip he was planning and didn't seem to notice or mind that Ethan mostly listened, which was fine because Walt's stories were good and the Sportster needed the full hour anyway. Between jobs, he answered the phone 4 times. 2 new inquiries, 1 parts question he could answer from memory, 1 callback from his parts supplier in Riverside confirming availability on the Electroglide fork components. He wrote the confirmation down in the margin of the appointment book and felt a small, quiet satisfaction about it that he didn't examine too closely. He called Renee at 6 before he left the shop. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been thinking about calling him. "How are things?" she said, and this time the way she asked it was different, lighter, with a question that was genuine rather than careful. "Better," he said. "I'll tell you the whole story soon. It's a long one." "Is it a good long story?" "Yeah." He thought about it for a second. "It's a strange one, but it comes out right." "Those are the best kind," Renee said. "I think so too." He went home. He ate dinner. He prepared for Friday. Preparing for Friday meant sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad and writing down in his own direct shorthand what he needed to know before he agreed to anything formal with Marcus Reynolds. Not because he didn't trust Marcus, he had strangely developed a significant degree of trust in the man in the course of 2 brief conversations which he recognized as unusual and chose to accept as data rather than discount as naivety. But because Ethan Walker had been in business for 9 years by being precise about agreements, and the habit of precision didn't turn off because the other party had arrived on a Harley-Davidson instead of in a suit, he wrote 4 things down: scope exactly which bikes, which services at what intervals with what lead time for scheduling. Rate full rate meant his real rate, not a negotiated discount in exchange for volume. He would not discount his labor. He'd learned that lesson at 31 when he had given a fleet discount to a local delivery company and spent 8 months doing high-volume work at margins that didn't cover his actual costs. Independence, he worked on what came through the door. All of it. The chapter bikes got priority scheduling, but did not get exclusive access to the shop. His other customers were his other customers. Scope again differently. He fixed motorcycles. That was the work. If the work was ever anything other than that, the arrangement ended. He wasn't writing this into a legal contract because you didn't put that in a legal contract with men like Marcus Reynolds. But he was going to say it plainly in the room the way he'd already said a version of it at the first meeting, and he needed to be clear in his own head before he said it again. He looked at the 4 things on the legal pad for a while. Then he wrote a 5th thing, the Electroglide. He crossed it out, put the pen down, then picked it up and wrote it again because it was relevant, and he wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. The money from the collection was sitting in his checking account. He'd deposited it that afternoon, a transaction that had required him to stand at the ATM for a full 30 seconds before he could complete it. The parts were confirmed available in Riverside. The rebuild was real and imminent and would require about 60 hours of work spread across weeks. He could do it nights and weekends the way he'd always done it, slowly, carefully, in the spaces between everything else. He was going to get his bike back. He sat with that for a moment. Then he folded the legal pad, left it on the table, and went to bed. Friday morning arrived clear and cool, the kind of October morning in Bakersfield that almost made you forgive the summer. Ethan was at the shop by 7:30, which was earlier than he needed to be, but felt right he wanted to run his regular morning. Before the meeting, wanted to be mid-work. When Marcus arrived, rather than standing around with the waiting energy of a man who'd cleared his schedule. He had a Dana Bra in for a fuel system service, and he worked it steadily, methodically with the radio on and the garage door open to the morning air. He was replacing the fuel filter when his phone buzzed at 9:15, not a call of a text from an unknown number that he immediately understood was Marcus. On our way, 40 minutes, our way, plural. Ethan set his phone down. He finished the fuel filter. He ran the bike and checked for leaks and found none. He shut it down, parked it in the customer bay, and wiped his hands on a clean rag. He was not nervous. He checked, and he was genuinely not nervous. That was something. He was making his second coffee of the morning when he heard them. He'd heard them before he knew the sound, now would probably always know it, but it still did something to the air in the room when it built outside. The low rolling thunder of multiple engines running together, closer and closer, until the first bike turned into the lot and the others followed, and then the engine shut down. In that sequence he'd experienced once before, and the silence came down. He counted 9 this time, not the 11 from the first visit. 9 plus Marcus, who pulled in last and parked at the front of the group the way a man parks when the others leave the front space for him without being asked. Marcus walked in first. He was wearing the vest today patch, forward the full presentation. He looked at Ethan, then at the shop, then at Ethan again. "Good morning," Marcus said. "Morning." Ethan handed him the second coffee. He'd made it at the right moment, which Marcus noticed and didn't comment on. The other men came in behind Marcus, not crowding, arranging themselves around the space with the ease of people who understood how to occupy a room without dominating it unnecessarily. Ethan recognized the red-haired man Coop he'd later learn, in a tall, angular man with a silver earring who leaned against the parts cabinet with his arms folded and watched everything with calibrated attention. The others arranged themselves at various distances, some looking at the bikes in the bays, some at the tools, some just standing. Logan was not there. "You look better than you did 2 days ago," Marcus said. He was holding the coffee, but not drinking it yet, just holding it the way men hold things when they're in a conversation that matters. "I slept," Ethan said. "Good." Marcus looked around the shop again, the Fuller appointment book visible on the desk, the 2 bikes in bays, the parts organized on the bench. "You've been busy." "Word got out." "Word I put out," Marcus said without apology. "I wanted to see how you handled volume before we sat down today, whether you scaled right or rushed." Ethan looked at him. "You were testing me." "I was observing. There's a difference." Marcus finally drank from the coffee, set the cup on the workbench. "You didn't rush. Customer from Porterville told her nephew you found something in 8 minutes that 2 other shops missed in 2 hours combined. Walt Kowalski said you listened to him talk about fishing the whole time you worked and never made him feel like he was in the way." He met Ethan's eyes. "That's not just mechanical skill. That's how you run a shop. Ethan said nothing. He was listening. I've been part of this chapter for 22 years, Marcus said. Before that, I was with a chapter in Nevada for 6 years. In that time, I have worked with, he paused, counting something internally. I think 11 different shops. Service shops, specialty shops. One guy who worked out of his garage in Reno, who was the best carburetor man I ever met. He folded his arms. In all of that, I've had maybe 3 mechanics I would describe as genuinely trustworthy, not competent. Trustworthy, those are different things. Yeah, Ethan said, they are. You're the 4th, Marcus said it flatly, not as flattery, as a fact he was reporting. The garage was quiet enough that Ethan could hear the guy with the silver earring shift his weight against the parts cabinet. Let me tell you what I want, Marcus said. He unfolded his arms. 12 bikes, full annual service each one. Scheduling at your discretion. I know you've got other clients. I know you can't drop everything. We give you a 2-week lead time on scheduled work. Emergency repairs, meaning a bike that's down and a rider who needs to ride, we call first, and you tell us what you can do. You never promise what you can't deliver, and we never push you beyond what you've said is possible. He paused. Rate is your rate, full. I don't negotiate mechanics' labor rates. Man who does that ends up with a mechanic who skips steps. Ethan had written 4 things on a legal pad last night. Marcus had just addressed 3 of them without being asked. Independence, Ethan said. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Say it plain. My other customers stay my other customers. The woman from Porterville, Gerald, with the touring bike, Walt Kowalski and his Sportster, they come first if they were scheduled first. Chapter bikes get priority over walk-ins, not over existing commitments. Agreed. No hesitation. And the work it is motorcycles, Ethan said. That's all I do, and that's all this is. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Not a long moment, just long enough for the statement to land and be received. You said something like that Tuesday. I'm saying it again today because today we're making an agreement. Something moved in Marcus's expression that wasn't quite a smile but occupied the same general space. Walker, if I wanted someone for anything other than motorcycles, I wouldn't be in a repair shop. He picked up the coffee again. I would be somewhere else talking to someone else who would not be you. He drank. We're clear, Ethan said. They shook hands. It was not a long handshake. It was a firm, brief, complete handshake, the kind that actually means something, because both parties understand it as a closing rather than a gesture. Then Marcus turned to the man with the silver earring, Vic. Vic straightened from the parts cabinet. He reached inside his vest and came out with a folded document. Not a contract, more like a list, 3 pages of paper folded in thirds. He handed it to Ethan. That's the 12 bikes, Vic said. He had a low, precise voice, the voice of someone who worked with details. Make, model, year, last service date, known issues. Think of it as a fleet introduction. He nodded toward the paper. Some of those last service dates are optimistic. Ethan unfolded the pages. He scanned them with the quick eye of a man who'd been reading service histories for years, and within 30 seconds, he had identified 4 bikes that were overdue in ways that would cause problems soon, and one that had a note next to it that made him stop. This one, he said. He pointed at the 6th entry on the 2nd page. 1993 FLHTC, last service date says 14 months. The note says intermittent loss of power over 60. That's Coop's bike, Vic said. Ethan looked at Coop, the red-haired man who had stationed himself near the garage entrance. Coop was watching Ethan with the contained expression of a man who'd been told by various people that his bike was fine and had chosen to believe them because the alternative was inconvenient. Intermittent power loss at highway speed on a 30-year-old touring bike that hasn't been fully serviced in 14 months, Ethan said. Is most likely ignition module, could be carburetor fuel was delivery, could be the rotor if there's some heat buildup happening. Any of those 3 left alone long enough becomes a highway breakdown or worse. He looked at Coop directly. How long has it been doing it? Coop held his gaze for a second. 4 months. 4 months, Ethan repeated. He said it without judgment, just acknowledging the timeline. The last shop said it was probably just the heat. Summer in the valley. It's not the heat, Ethan said. The symptoms you're describing don't respond to ambient temperature changes the way heat-related issues do. If it's cutting out above 60 and coming back when you slow down, That's either the ignition module failing under load or a fuel delivery problem that opens up under sustained upper RPM demand. He set the page down. I want that bike in here Monday. Coop looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with the expression of a man who was very purposefully not saying I told you so. Monday, Coop said to Ethan. Yeah, okay. Bring it in the morning. I'll have a diagnosis by noon. Coop nodded once. There was something in the way he did it, a slight relaxing of the jaw, the release of something he'd been holding that told Ethan the man had been quietly worried about the bike for 4 months and had been constructing reasons not to deal with it. That was human. That was also the thing that caused serious problems. Marcus watched this exchange with the careful attention of a man who already knew what he was seeing, but wanted to see how Ethan handled it. That's why I'm here, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The next hour was operational, going through the fleet list bike by bike with Vic and Marcus Ethan, asking specific questions and writing notes in the margin of his own copy, building the service schedule that would run the 12 machines through walkers over the course of the next 3 months at intervals that made mechanical sense rather than logistical convenience. He asked about mileage, about riding patterns, about which bikes saw highway miles versus city versus occasional weekend use. He found out that 2 of the 12 were essentially garage bikes that got ridden 4 times a year, which meant their service needs were different from the high-mileage machines in ways that most people didn't account for. A bike that sits still develops its own problems, seal dry out and fuel degradation, and brake caliper corrosion, none of which were mileage-triggered, but all of which were time-triggered. You know your stuff, Vic said at some point during this in the tone of a man confirming a hypothesis. It's just motorcycles, Ethan said. I've been doing it a long time. No, Vic shook his head slightly. Lots of people have been doing it a long time. That's not what this is. He said it without elaboration and went back to the list. By 11:30, the operational framework was solid. 12 bike service schedule mapped out, Coop's FLHTC flagged for immediate priority, 2 others earmarked for the following week. Ethan had filled 4 pages of notes in his own handwriting, the cramped, precise shorthand he'd developed over years. That was essentially unreadable to anyone who hadn't watched him develop it. He'd made commitments he was confident he could keep and declined to make commitments he wasn't. Then Marcus said, "There's one more thing." Ethan looked up. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his vest. He came out with an envelope, not the kind Logan had brought, which was letter-sized. This was business-size legal weight. He held it out. Ethan took it. "Open it," Marcus said. Inside was a single page, a document. Ethan read it once, then read it again more slowly. It was a letter formally formatted on the letterhead of a legal entity he didn't immediately recognize, stating that Mojave Iron Holdings was formally designating Walker's Motorcycle Repair as the preferred service provider for all vehicles associated with their affiliated network. And further, that the tenant of the property at the listed address was protected under a covenant of commercial continuity for a minimum period of 5 years, not 3. 5 years, not 3. Ethan looked at Marcus. The Garrison conversation this morning told us 3, Ethan said. Garrison got the offer as written, Marcus said. The covenant document supersedes the basic lease terms. Your attorney, if you have one, and you should, will confirm that the covenant provides stronger protection than the lease extension alone. He met Ethan's eyes. 5 years, fixed rate, renewable. Ethan sat with the paper in his hands. Marcus, he said, then stopped. He didn't have an immediate follow-up to the name he'd started the sentence because he felt like something needed to be said and then he didn't know what it was. You fixed a bike, Marcus said simply. You used your own parts and your own time, and you didn't ask for anything, and you did it right. That's all you did. He folded his arms. What you're holding is what happens when someone does that in front of the right people at the right time. It's not charity. It's not, he searched for the word, patronage. It's proportionate. What you gave deserved what you're getting. Ethan looked at the document for another moment. He thought about Logan's letter from Kayla in his chest pocket. He thought about the cash in his checking account that he hadn't earned by hours or by invoice. He thought about the eviction notice in the trash under the workbench. The building covenant, he said. 5 years is real money. You didn't have to go that far. I know I didn't, Marcus said. I went that far because the situation warranted it and because I wanted to. He let that sit. Are you going to argue with me about it? Ethan exhaled. No. Good. Marcus's expression relaxed by a degree. Because I've been in rooms with men who argue about the size of what they're given, and it exhausts me. One of the other men, a compact, weathered man near the back who hadn't spoken, laughed. A small, genuine laugh that broke the formality of the room slightly. Others followed it. The tension that Ethan hadn't consciously registered until it lifted came down, and the room became something different, not a negotiation, just a group of people in a garage. Coop walked over from the entrance. He put out his hand to Ethan. "For the bike," he said, "and for not letting me pretend it was fine." Ethan shook it. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock. "I'll be here at 7:55, Coop said. "I like to be early when someone's going to tell me I've been wrong about something." This time Ethan laughed. It came up naturally, unplanned. Coop grinned a wide, unguarded grin that looked slightly out of place on a large, red-haired man in a Hells Angels vest, and was completely genuine because of it. Marcus watched this, and something settled in his face. A calculation completed, a thing confirmed. "There's a dinner tonight," Marcus said to Ethan. "Chapter thing, nothing formal. We do it first Friday of the month, place called Rosario's on Union Avenue. Good food, loud music, nothing that would make your accountant nervous." He paused. "You should come." Ethan opened his mouth to decline reflex. The default response of a man who spent most of his social energy at work and didn't have a strong habit of adding more. Marcus read it. Not an obligation, an invitation. Different thing. "What time?" Ethan said. 7. "You can leave whenever you want. Nobody's keeping score." "I'll think about it." "That's a yes from a man who wanted to say no," Marcus observed, and turned to the group. "We're done here. Let's let the man work." The group moved toward the exit with the same unhurried organization they'd arrived with. Marcus was last, and at the door he turned back one more time. "Coop's bike," he said. "When you diagnose it, whatever it is, just fix it. Don't call him first. Don't build up to it. Don't soften anything. He can handle it, and he respects it more when you're straight." "I'm always straight," Ethan said. "I know." Marcus said it with a finality that meant, "That's why I'm here." Then he walked out. 9 motorcycles started and arranged themselves and rolled out of the lot and down the street, and Ethan stood at the garage door and watched them go. He stood there for a while after the sound faded. He looked at the document in his hand. 5 years, fixed rate, renewable. He looked at the appointment book on the desk with its new full pages. He looked at the legal pad on the corner of the bench with his 4 or 5 items from last night. He thought about something Marcus had said. What you gave deserved what you're getting. He thought about that for a long time. Not because he disagreed with it, but because he wanted to understand it correctly. He hadn't fixed the bike expecting proportionate return. That was the thing. He'd fixed it because a young man was frightened and had done the right thing in the wrong way and was going to pay too high a price for it, and Ethan had the skill to change that and the will to use it. He hadn't been calculating. He hadn't been performing virtue for an audience. He'd just done the next right thing in a sequence of next right things and not asked what came after. What had come after was this: 5 years of security, 12 bikes, a room full of men who treated him with a specificity of respect, that he recognized that particular respect that one person gives another when they have seen them do something true. He went back to work. The afternoon was full. Coop's 9 o'clock Monday already penciled in 2 other chapter bikes scheduled for the following week, his regular customers filling the remaining slots in the pattern he'd maintained for 9 years. He finished the Dyna's fuel system service and called the owner. He sourced a hard-to-find part for the Triumph restoration using a contact in Phoenix he hadn't called in over a year, who picked up with the easy warmth of someone who doesn't need contact to maintain a relationship. He cleared his bench, organized the fleet notes into a folder he labeled with the date, and brewed a third coffee that he mostly forgot to drink. At 5:30, he turned off the lift, washed his hands at the shop sink, and stood looking at the space. The fluorescent light in the back was still flickering. He'd kept meaning to replace it. He went to the electrical supply box under the back shelf, found the right tube size, and changed it out in 4 minutes. The light came on steady and clean, and the back of the shop looked under that light exactly like what it was: a working space full of tools and parts and the organized residue of honest labor. He picked up his jacket. He thought about Rosario's on Union Avenue. He thought about his default response, the reflex decline, the man who stays in his shop answer that he'd been giving his whole adult life, not out of antisocial tendency, but out of the habit of a person whose work was his world and whose world was therefore mostly solitary. He thought about Danny, who in a group home in Modesto made a point of being present at the table for every meal, even on days when his brain made it hard because the people at the table were real, and presence was the thing he could give. He called Renee. "I got invited to a dinner tonight," he said when she picked up. I'll explain the whole story another time, but by men I've recently come to know, and I almost said no. "Did you say no?" Renee asked. "I said I'd think about it, which means I'm calling you to figure it out what I'm going to do." Renee was quiet for a second. "Ethan, when's the last time you went somewhere that wasn't the shop or the grocery store or Danny's?" He thought about it. "I went to Frank Delgado's retirement thing in August. That was a work contacts party that you stayed at for 40 minutes and then left because you said you had a carburetor to finish. The carburetor was due Monday." "Go to dinner," Renee said. He went to dinner. Rosario's on Union was exactly what Marcus had described. Loud, warm, the kind of Mexican restaurant where the food arrived in quantities that assumed you hadn't eaten since yesterday and the music was live and slightly too loud and nobody was bothered by that. Marcus was already there when Ethan arrived at 7:04, seated at a long table near the back with 6 of the men from that morning, plus 3 others he hadn't met. The table had the comfortable disorganization of a group that had been doing this for years, overlapping conversations, a pitcher of water and a pitcher of something else, a basket of chips that had already been refilled once. Marcus saw Ethan come in and raised a hand, not waving him over with the exaggerated gesture of a man performing welcome, just a single hand raised steady, the way you acknowledge someone you were expecting and are genuinely glad to see. Ethan sat down. The man to his left turned and put out a hand immediately. "Eddie Vargas, I ride the Road King with the electrical gremlin that Marcus says you're going to fix in 2 weeks." "Road King on the list," Ethan confirmed. "What's the gremlin doing?" "Turn signal on the right side cuts out at random. Left side fine. Done it for 6 months." Ethan thought for a second. "Has anyone checked the ground connection at the right front turn signal housing?" Eddie stared at him. I don't know. Is that where you'd start?" "That's where I'd start," Ethan said. "Intermittent signal failure on one side only is almost never the bulb or the switch. It's usually a ground issue that makes contact in some positions and not others. The diagnosis usually takes about 20 minutes. "I've been riding with a broken turn signal for 6 months, Eddie said. "And you just told me it's probably a 20-minute fix." "Probably," Ethan said. "Could be something else. But that's where I'd start." Eddie turned to the man across the table. "I want you to hear this. I have been complaining about this signal for 6 months." "I know you have," the man across the table said. "We all know you have." The food came. Ethan ate real food, good food, the kind of meal that reminded you that eating was supposed to be an event rather than a function. He talked to Eddie about the Road King. He talked to the man across the table whose name was Frank. Different Frank than Gerald's friend Frank. This Frank was a former Navy mechanic who'd worked on aircraft carrier equipment for 16 years before getting out, and who had opinions about the difference between hydraulic systems designed to be maintained and hydraulic systems designed to look maintained, and the conversation went places Ethan didn't expect. Marcus was at the other end of the table and mostly let the dinner happen without directing it. Occasionally he caught Ethan's eye across the table, not checking on him, just present the way a host is present at something they've arranged, and trust will take care of itself. At some point during the second hour after the plates had been cleared and people were sitting with coffee and the music had gotten somewhat louder and the conversation had split into 4 overlapping threads, Coop sat down in the chair next to Ethan that Eddie had vacated to make a phone call. "I want to tell you something," Coop said. "Okay." "The bike." Coop put his hands on the table clasped. "I knew something was wrong with it. I've known for a while. I kept telling myself it was the heat, or it was the altitude when we went up to Tehachapi, or I kept finding reasons." He looked at his hands. "You said it straight this morning, and I didn't flinch because I'd been waiting for someone to say it straight for 4 months." He looked up. "I just wanted you to know that. You did it right." "I appreciate that," Ethan said. "Marcus picks people careful," Coop said. "I've been with this chapter 11 years, and I've watched him pick people. He's wrong sometimes, not often, but sometimes. When he's not wrong, it's because there's something the person does or says he stopped. Anyway, he's not wrong this time." Ethan looked at him. How long has he been watching? Coop smiled at that, a slow, knowing smile. Why do you think a chapter president personally shows up to a one-man shop at closing time on a Tuesday with 10 other guys? Ethan thought about that. He thought about Ray Delgado arriving Tuesday morning. He thought about the text message at 5:47. He thought about Marcus showing up that evening with 11 bikes and walking directly to the repaired Harley and crouching next to it for 2 full minutes. He already knew about the shop, Ethan said, before Logan took the bike. Coop said nothing, which was an answer. How long? Ethan said. A few months, Coop said. A rider whose bike you fixed last spring, one of our affiliate guys, not chapter, but connected, he mentioned you, said you diagnosed something 3 other mechanics had called unfixable and fixed it in an afternoon and charged him exactly what it cost you to fix it. Marcus filed it away. He shrugged. That's how Marcus works. He hears something, he files it, he waits to see if it holds up. He paused. Logan taking the bike that night, crashing it in front of your shop. Marcus called it an accident, but I've been watching him long enough to know that he received it as confirmation. Ethan sat with this for a moment. He was going to reach out anyway, Ethan said. Eventually, on his own timeline in his own way. Coop leaned back. What Logan did just accelerated the schedule, and it let Marcus see something he couldn't have arranged to see otherwise. What's that? Who you are when nobody's watching and there's nothing in it for you. Coop met his eyes. That's the thing you can't manufacture. That's what Marcus was waiting to confirm. Ethan thought about standing in the garage doorway at 2:30 in the morning, watching a stranger's taillight disappear around the corner. No audience, no calculation, just the next right thing. He thought about Danny on the shoulder of the highway for 37 minutes. He thought about the kind of person who stops and the kind who doesn't, and which kind he'd always known he was. Marcus appeared at the end of the table. He looked at Coop, then Ethan. You explaining things, he said to Coop. Just talking? Coop said. Marcus looked at Ethan. You okay? Yeah, Ethan said. He meant it. I'm good. Marcus nodded once. He sat down at the head of the table and poured himself coffee and looked at the room, his people, his table of dinner that happened every first Friday and had been happening every first Friday for more years than Ethan had been in Bakersfield. And there was something in the way he looked at it that Ethan recognized because he felt the same thing when he looked at his shop at the end of a good day. It was the look of a man who built something and is watching it work. Ethan stayed until 9:15. When he stood to go, Marcus walked him to the door. Monday, Marcus said, Coop's bike. I'll have a diagnosis by noon, Ethan said. Like I said, I know you will. Marcus paused. He's been riding that bike for 7 years. He doesn't show it, but he's attached to it. I'll treat it like it's mine, Ethan said. Marcus looked at him for a second. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Ethan drove home at the dark with the windows down. October air moving through the car, cool and clean, with the particular dry quality of the Central Valley that he'd spent 9 years learning to call his own. The streets were familiar. The turns he made automatically, the lights he knew the timing of the stretch of road outside his neighborhood where you could see the stars if the clouds were right. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his mind almost quiet, which was unusual for him. Usually there was a running list the next job, the parts he needed, the bill. He hadn't paid the thing he'd said wrong to a customer, the thing he should have said differently. Usually his mind was an engine running high. Tonight it was running easy. He thought about the document in his jacket pocket. 5 years. He thought about Coop saying Marcus files it away. He thought about the mechanic in Reno who was the best carburetor man Marcus had ever met. And he thought about what it meant to be on a list that's short in the mind of a man who'd been paying attention for decades. He thought about his electric glide in the corner of the shop with the canvas cover over it, waiting. He thought about Monday, Coop's 1993 FLHTC. He thought about the symptom profile intermittent power loss above 64 months duration, last full service 14 months ago. He thought about the ignition module and the fuel delivery and the rotor, and which one he'd rule out first and in what sequence, and how long each test would take. He was already working the problem, turning it over his mind, doing what his mind did with a mechanical puzzle, circling it, finding the shape of it, understanding it before his hands touched it. He smiled at himself for that. You couldn't turn it off. You wouldn't want to. He parked in front of his apartment. He sat in the car for a moment. Then he went inside, poured a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen counter with the document from Marcus's vest in his hand one more time. He read it again, not because he'd forgotten what it said, but because he wanted to feel the fact of it, the real concrete fact of it one more time before he slept. 5 years. He put the document on the counter. He was 38 years old and he had a shop with 5 years of security and 12 new service accounts and a fleet list in a folder in a 1993 FLHTC coming in Monday morning. And the most valuable thing he owned was sitting under a canvas cover waiting to be rebuilt. And his brother liked baseball and tamales and documentaries about the Pacific Coast Highway, and his sister in Phoenix would be getting the full story very soon. And everything that had been pressing on him from the outside was no longer pressing. He went to bed. He set his alarm for 6:30 because Monday was coming and there was work to do. He slept. Monday came the way Mondays come when you've spent the weekend and you're working toward them with purpose, with traction, with the specific energy of a person who knows what they're walking into and has already thought 3 steps ahead. Ethan was at the shop at 6:50. He made coffee, ran through his supply inventory, pulled up the fleet notes folder, and reviewed Coop's entry one more time. 1993 FLHTC, intermittent power loss above 60 miles per hour, 4 months duration. Last full service, 14 months ago. He'd been turning the problem over in his mind since Friday night, not obsessively, just the way a good mechanic turns problems over letting the possibilities settle into order by probability. He had a sequence. He knew where he was starting and where he'd go next if the first answer didn't hold. Coop arrived at 7:53. He'd said 7:55, which meant he'd aimed for 7:50 and arrived 2 minutes early and counted it as the same thing. He walked the bike in with the careful attention of a man who was watching it for symptoms even as he rode it, which meant he'd ridden it here at highway speed and paid attention to whether it acted up. Ethan read this before Coop said anything. "Did it do it on the way over?" Ethan said. Coop's jaw tightened slightly. "Once between the interchange and Union. About 4 seconds, then it came back." "Good," Ethan said. Coop looked at him. "That's good. It means the symptom is active right now, makes diagnosis faster." Ethan pulled on his gloves. "Leave me with it. I'll call you before noon." Coop stood for a moment, the look of a man who wanted to stay and watch and knew that staying and watching was not what he should do. "You'll call me." "Before noon," Ethan said. "Go." Coop went. Ethan worked the bike with the focused sequence he'd planned. He started with the ignition module, a known failure point on bikes of this era, especially under sustained load and heat, which mapped cleanly to the symptom of power loss that appeared above 60 and resolved when the bike slowed and cooled slightly. He pulled the module and tested it on the bench with his diagnostic unit. The module showed marginal output under simulated load, not failed, not clean, but sitting right at the edge of the threshold where it would work fine at low demand and fall off at high demand. That was finding number 1. It would have been enough for most mechanics to stop. Ethan didn't stop. He went to the fuel delivery next because a diagnostic sequence was only worth doing completely. What he found there stopped him. The petcock, the fuel shutoff valve, had a diaphragm that was collapsing under vacuum at sustained high flow. At low RPM, enough fuel got through. At sustained highway RPM, the diaphragm was restricting flow just enough to create a lean condition that, combined with the marginal ignition module, produced exactly the symptom Coop had been experiencing for 4 months. It wasn't one problem, it was 2 problems interacting. Each one individually might have been survivable. Together, they created something that was going to get worse and eventually strand Coop on a highway or worse. Ethan sat back on his heels and looked at the bike. He thought about the last shop that had looked at this and called it the heat. He thought about 4 months of Coop riding a machine with a compounding failure and constructing reasons to believe it was fine. He thought about a highway at speed and a bike that lost power at the wrong moment. He picked up his phone at 11:17 and called. Coop answered on the first ring. "Tell me." "2 things," Ethan said. "Ignition module is failing under load marginal output, not dead yet, but close. And your petcock diaphragm is collapsing at high fuel flow, which is creating a lean condition at highway RPM. A pause. They're feeding each other. That's why it's been intermittent. Some days the conditions line up worse than others. Silence on the line. Coop. Yeah, his voice was flat. Yeah, I hear you. I can have both fixed by end of day. I have the module in stock. The petcock I need to source, but I've got a supplier who can get me the right diaphragm kit by 3. How much? Ethan gave him the number. Parts plus labor, exactly what it cost. Another pause. Okay, Coop said. Do it. Then the other shop said it was fine. The other shop looked at the symptom and stopped. Ethan said, that's not how you diagnose a bike you care about. Coop was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, not rough exactly, but carrying something. 7 years I've had that bike. You understand 7 years. I understand, Ethan said. It'll be right by tonight. He ordered the petcock kit from his Riverside supplier, the same man who'd confirmed the Electroglide 4 components, and it arrived at 2:40, which was 40 minutes better than promised, which was why Ethan kept using him despite the distance. He replaced the ignition module, first tested it under simulated load, confirmed clean output across the full RPM range. Then he replaced the petcock diaphragm, bled the system, checked for any secondary issues. The fuel restriction might have masked a slightly fouled main jet that he cleaned out while he had access, a small thing, the kind of thing that accumulated over 14 months of less than ideal fuel delivery. He started the bike at 4:15. It idled clean. He ran it through the RPM range on the stand, listening, feeling the response, checking the fuel flow with the vacuum gauge he'd left in line for exactly this test. The delivery was consistent and full across the entire range. The ignition was sharp and responsive. He called Coop at 4:30. It's done, Ethan said. Come get it. Coop was there at 4:52. He walked into the shop and looked at the bike, and then looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who is trying to be composed about something he is not composed about. Start it, Ethan said. Coop settled onto the seat. He started the bike. He sat on the idling machine and listened with his whole body the way a rider listens, not with ears alone, but with hands and posture and the instinct of years. He listened for a long moment. Take it out, Ethan said. Get it on the highway. Go past 60 and hold it there for a few minutes. Come back and tell me what it does. Coop looked at him. Then he put it in gear and rode out. He was gone 35 minutes. When he came back, he parked in the garage bay and sat on the bike for a moment before getting off. He didn't say anything right away. He swung off and stood beside the machine with his hand on the tank and just stayed there for a second. Then he turned around. Not once, Coop said. Not a single hiccup. Held 65 for 20 minutes on the bypass, and it ran like... He stopped. It ran like it did when I first got it. Ethan nodded. 7 years, Coop said again. He said it differently this time, not the weight of worry, but the weight of relief. I forgot what it felt like when it was right. That's what right feels like, Ethan said. Coop paid him. He tipped him significantly, which Ethan accepted this time without argument, because the work had been real and difficult and correctly done, and Coop was a man who understood what he was paying for. At the door, Coop turned back. I'm going to tell every rider I know, he said. Not because Marcus asked me to, because I want to. I appreciate that, Ethan said. You understand the difference, Coop said, between Marcus telling people and me telling people. Ethan thought about it. Marcus's word is authority, he said. Yours is experience. Coop pointed at him. Exactly right. He went out. The shop was quiet after he left. Ethan stood in the space and let the quiet be what it was, not emptiness, but completion. A day that had started with a problem and ended with a solution. That was the best kind of day. That was honestly the only kind of day Ethan Walker had ever really wanted. He was cleaning the bench when the door opened again. He assumed it was a walk-in they'd been getting, more of those people who'd heard the name from one thread of connection or another and showed up without calling. He turned around ready to take down a name and a bike model. It wasn't a walk-in. It was a young woman, 19 or 20, with dark hair. In Logan's eyes, the same direct quality, the same tendency to deliver information with them before the mouth opened. She was wearing a jacket that was slightly too large for her, carrying a paper bag from the Vietnamese restaurant 2 doors down, and she stopped just inside the garage entrance and looked at Ethan with the steady, evaluating attention of someone who has been thinking about a meeting for a while and is now having it. You're Ethan, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, he said. I'm Kayla. He looked at her. The 19-year-old who'd called her brother at 9:30 on a desperate night and said come, and Logan had come, and everything that followed from that had brought Ethan to where he was standing right now. He hadn't expected her here. Logan had said she wanted to meet him, had said she'd written the letter, but Ethan had assumed it would happen eventually someday, not today. Logan doesn't know I'm here, Kayla said immediately. I didn't tell him because he would have wanted to come with me and I needed to do this myself. She held up the paper bag. I brought food from the place next door. I asked them what the mechanic who works late usually gets, and they said beef pho, so I got that. Ethan looked at the bag. He looked at her. How do they know what I usually get? Apparently you order from them every Tuesday and Thursday night when you're working late, Kayla said. The woman at the counter knew who I meant immediately. Ethan processed this. He'd been getting pho from Van's Noodle House for 6 years and had apparently never noticed that they'd noticed him enough to have an order on record. He thought briefly about the Vietnamese restaurant on his block and the dry cleaner and the shoe repair place and what it meant to be embedded in a neighborhood for 9 years without fully knowing you were embedded. Come in, he said. She came in fully. She looked around the shop with the careful attention of someone who was trying to understand a person through their space, not nosily, just observantly. She looked at the tools, the lift, the bikes in base, the appointment book on the desk. She looked at the corner where the canvas-covered Electroglide waited. What's under the cover, she said. My bike, Ethan said. I'm rebuilding it. She nodded. She set the bag on the workbench and pulled out 2 containers and 2 sets of chopsticks and a sleeve of napkins, arranged them with a practicality that suggested she'd done similar things in a lot of different situations and didn't overthink it. You read my letter, she said. Yeah. He hesitated. I've read it a few times. She looked at him, then direct opened the kind of look that bypasses the social layer and lands on what's actually there. I meant everything in it. I know you did. I didn't want to just write thank you, she said, because that felt like it was the right word, but not the right, like trying to cover something large with something small. You don't owe me anything, Ethan said. I know I don't. She said it without heat, just factually. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to pay a debt. I'm here because I wanted to see you. Because the person who did what you did, I needed to know what that person looks like. She looked at him steadily. And I needed you to know that it wasn't just a bike. That night was Logan getting to me when he did the way he did. That was the difference between something bad and something that would have been permanent. Her voice was steady, but it cost her something to keep it that way, and she didn't try to hide that cost. I don't say that for effect. I say it because it's accurate. Ethan sat down on the rolling stool. He looked at this young woman standing in his garage with Fio from the restaurant next door and her brother's eyes and 9 months of something heavy that she was carrying with the straightforward dignity of someone who'd decided they were going to carry it well. Are you okay? He said, just that. She blinked. Not because it was unexpected, more like she'd been braced for something more, and the simplicity of it landed differently than she'd prepared for. I'm getting there, she said. I have my own place now. Logan helped me find it. I start a new job next week, data entry. Nothing glamorous, but it's mine. Yeah. She looked at the floor for a second, then back up. I'm getting there, Phil. That's the right answer, Ethan said. She sat on an upturned plastic crate near the bench, the one Logan had used the night of the crash, though she didn't know that, and opened one of the faux containers. She handed the other to Ethan without asking if he wanted it, which he did, and which he hadn't realized until the smell hit him. They ate together in the garage, Kayla on the crate, and Ethan on the stool with the sounds of the shop settling around them and the afternoon light going amber through the open door. She asked him about the shop, not politely actually interested, asking specific questions about how he'd built it and what the hardest years had been and why motorcycles specifically. He told her more than he'd expected to. She listened in a way that people don't always listen fully, without constructing her response while he was still talking. At some point, she said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why didn't you take any money?" She looked at him directly. That night, Logan offered his watch. He said it was worth a few $1,000s and you pushed it away. You had an eviction notice on your desk. You needed the money. She paused. Why? Ethan thought about it. He thought about all the ways he could answer it, the version about Danny, the version about what his father had told him when he was 12, the version about the kind of person he'd decided to be at some point early enough that he couldn't remember deciding. All of those were true. None of them were complete. Because the moment you take the watch, he said, the thing changes. It becomes a transaction. And once it's a transaction, it's between me and the watch, not between me and him. He set down the chopsticks. I didn't want to be separated from what I was doing by money. I wanted to just do it. Straight, clean. He looked at her. Does that make sense? Kayla was quiet for a second. Yeah, she said, it makes a lot of sense. She paused. Logan said you told him to make better choices. I did. He told me that like 5 times. He kept saying it. She shook her head slightly. You know that hit him harder than anything else, not the bike being fixed, not even the parts. The fact that you said that and nothing else. I meant it as not criticism, more as, I know what you meant, she said. Logan knew too. That's why it hit him the way it did. She looked at him. He talks about you like I don't know how to describe it. Like you're someone he's known a long time. It's only been a couple weeks, but he talks about you like you're part of his life now. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He picked up the chopsticks again. Is that weird to hear? Kayla asked. A little, Ethan said. Good weird. She laughed, a real laugh, brief and genuine, and it changed her face completely. Made her look younger and lighter and exactly 19 in the best sense. They finished eating. She packed up the containers and the napkins with the same efficient practicality she'd unpacked them with, and she stood and looked at the shop one more time. I'm going to go before Logan realizes where I am and has a heart attack, she said. He worries. He's a good brother, Ethan said. He's the best, she said simply and without the qualification people usually add to that kind of statement. Just he's the best. Like it was just a fact. At the door, she turned back. The bike you're rebuilding, the one under the cover. Yeah. Will you finish it? Yeah, Ethan said. I will. She nodded like that confirmed something. Good. Then I think you deserve to ride something you built yourself. She left. Ethan stood in the garage for a while after she was gone. The faux containers were in the trash. The shop was clean. The afternoon had gone fully golden through the open door and was heading toward the kind of October evening that the Central Valley did better than most places, warm enough to still feel like summer, at the edges cool enough that you remembered it was fall. He walked to the corner. He pulled the canvas cover off the Electra Glide. He looked at it. He picked up his phone and called his parts supplier in Riverside. The fork kit, he said when the man answered. When can you ship it? I can get it out tomorrow morning, the supplier said. You'd have it Wednesday. Do it, Ethan said. He hung up. He stood with his hand on the stripped headstock of his bike, feeling the cold metal, feeling the patience in it. Machines were patient. They waited. They didn't judge the delay. They just held their shape until the person with the tools came back. Wednesday came with the fork kit, and Ethan began the rebuild in the early mornings before appointments 1 hour at a time. He worked it like he worked everything in sequence, precisely without shortcuts, with the same standard he'd apply to any machine brought in by any customer. Maybe a higher standard, maybe the highest standard he knew. He rebuilt the fork legs with new seals properly shimmed, torqued, to spec the process meditative and exact. He sourced a front wheel in better condition than the original from an estate sale in Fresno. He found a headlight bucket at an online auction that was better than correct. It was perfect the right year. Right finish, a piece that someone had kept with uncommon care. He worked the Triumph restoration in parallel. That bike was coming together too. Piece by piece, the owner checking in periodically by text to ask progress questions that Ethan answered briefly and accurately. The Triumph was a beautiful machine underneath its years of deferred maintenance. He was finding things that had been done right the first time and preserved well, and those discoveries were satisfying in the specific way that inherited quality is satisfying. The chapter bikes came through on the schedule Vic and Ethan had mapped out. Eddie Vargas's Road King, the intermittent right turn signal, took 19 minutes to diagnose and fix exactly as Ethan had told him at dinner. A corroded ground connection at the right front signal, housing cleaned and re-terminated, problem gone. Eddie stood watching the repair and shook his head the entire time, in the way of a man confronting how simple a thing that plagued him had actually been. 19 minutes, Eddie said. 6 months. 6 months and 19 minutes, Ethan said. I could hate you for that. You could. I don't, though. Eddie paid him and left laughing. They all left like that, with the specific satisfaction of a problem genuinely solved if a machine returned to the condition it deserved. Ethan learned each bike individually. He learned which ones were ridden hard and which were ridden carefully. He learned which riders knew their machines well and which knew them not at all but loved them anyway. He adjusted how he communicated the findings accordingly. Coop got straight and minimal because that was what Coop wanted. Eddie wanted the explanation and the context. A quiet man named Terrell who rode a 2004 Electroglide wanted every step written down in the receipt because he kept files on his bikes going back to their first day in his possession, which Ethan found not excessive but admirable. 3 weeks after the Friday meet, Marcus came in alone. No group, no formation, just Marcus on his own bike, a Road King Classic that was maintained with the same thorough care that Ethan had come to expect from a man who had opinions about quality and applied them consistently. He pulled in at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday when Ethan had a gap between a 9 o'clock and an 11:30. "Nothing's broken," Marcus said at the door. "I'm not here for service." "Okay," Ethan said. Marcus walked in. He looked at the Electroglide in the corner. Not under the canvas, now the front end partially reassembled, the fork legs in place, the new wheel mounted. He stood and looked at it with a mechanic's appreciation, reading the work, understanding what had been done. "Coming along," he said. "Slowly," Ethan said, "but right." Marcus nodded. He looked at the shop, the appointment book full through the end of the month. 2 bikes in bays, the organized energy of a place operating at capacity. He looked at it with a satisfaction that was quiet and complete. "I wanted to tell you something," Marcus said. He turned from the bike to Ethan. "When Coop called me after he picked up his bike Monday after you fixed the ignition module and the petcock, he said something I want you to hear." Ethan waited. "He said he felt like he got his bike back." Marcus let that land. 7 years he's had that machine. 2 different shops looked at the problem. And he said it wasn't until he rode it home from here that he felt like he actually had it back. He paused. "That's what you do. I want you to know I understand that." Ethan looked at him. "It's just diagnostic sequence. You go until you find the right thing, not the first thing." "Most people stop at the first thing," Marcus said. "I know, but most people are wrong." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "You know what the difference is between a mechanic and a craftsman?" "Tell me." "A mechanic fixes what's in front of him. A craftsman fixes what's actually wrong." He held Ethan's gaze. "You're a craftsman. I don't say that to most people. I say it to you because it's accurate and because you should hear it from someone whose opinion is worth something." Ethan received this the way he received most things, directly, without deflection, without false modesty. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." Marcus nodded once. The word was received. They moved on. "There's a rider in Visalia," Marcus said. "Not chapter, not affiliated. A woman named Diane Marsh. She's been riding for 25 years. She's got a touring bike that she depends on and a shop situation that's been unreliable. Her regular mechanic moved to Oregon last spring." He paused. "I told her about you." "Okay." "She'll call," Marcus said. "I want you to treat her exactly the same as you treat everyone else. Not better. The same." "That's how I treat everyone," Ethan said. "I know. I'm saying it anyway." Diane Marsh called that afternoon. She was direct on the phone, spoke about her bike with precise knowledge, asked specific questions, and listened carefully to the answers. She made an appointment for the following Tuesday. When she came in, she arrived 15 minutes early and spent the time while Ethan finished with a previous customer examining the tools on his pegboard with the focused attention of someone who evaluated competence by its instruments. She came back twice more that month. Each time she paid promptly, asked intelligent follow-up questions, and left with a bike that ran better than she'd brought it. On the 3rd visit, she brought a woman from her riding group, and on the next, she brought 2 more. Within 6 weeks of that first call from Marcus, Ethan had 4 new regular customers from Visalia alone. He hired help. He hadn't planned to. The shop had always been a one-man operation, and the one man was him, and that was how he'd thought it would remain. But the volume had scaled past the point where one man could give each job the time it deserved, and Walker's motorcycle repair had always been defined by giving each job the time it deserved. So he posted a listing, interviewed 6 candidates over the course of 2 days, and hired a 26-year-old named Joel Reyes, who'd graduated top of his technical program in Sacramento, had 3 years of dealership experience, and had left the dealership because, in his exact words during the interview, "I was fixing bikes the fast way every time, and I started to not recognize the work I was doing." Ethan looked at him for a long moment across the desk. You said that to dealership management. Yeah, Joel said. That's why I'm not at the dealership anymore. Ethan hired him on a handshake. Joel started the following Monday and within 2 weeks had demonstrated that his claim about quality standards was not an interview performance. He actually worked that way. He asked questions when he wasn't certain, rather than guessing. He redid a brake bleed on his second day because the feel wasn't right to him, which added 40 minutes to a job he could have called done. Ethan watched him do it and said nothing because that was exactly correct. Logan came in one Thursday afternoon while Joel was working a Sportster in the near bay, and Ethan was at the bench going through the fleet notes for the week's upcoming appointments. Logan stopped when he saw Joel, then looked at Ethan with an expression that took a moment to identify something. Between surprise and pleasure, the face of a person who has been watching a situation closely and just witnessed a development that confirms a trajectory they'd been hoping for. You hired someone, Logan said. Yeah. You needed to, Logan said. It wasn't a criticism of the time it took, it was straight acknowledgement. You'd have burned yourself out by December. Probably, Ethan said. Logan sat on the stool, the same stool he'd sat on the night of the crash, though Ethan doubted he thought about that every time. He'd become a regular presence in the shop, not because he had work done frequently. His bike was running perfectly on Ethan's own fork tubes, but because he'd built a habit of stopping by, and the habit had calcified into something that was simply part of his week. Kayla got the job, Logan said. Ethan looked up. The one she interviewed for? Yeah, data entry, small firm, good people. She starts Monday. He said it with a containment that was trying to hold something larger. She called me this morning. I could tell she was trying not to cry, and then she cried anyway. That's good crying, Ethan said. I know. Logan was quiet for a second. She came here without telling me. I know. She told me that too. What did you talk about, the bikes, Ethan said. The rebuild, faux from Vans. He paused. You. Logan looked at him. What about me? She said you're the best, Ethan said. No qualifier, just that. Logan looked at the floor. His jaw worked for a moment. He pressed his lips together and nodded a couple of times, slow, absorbing it, and then he looked up with the expression of a person who has received something they weren't prepared for and is integrating it in real time. She's going to be okay, Ethan said. Yeah, Logan said, she is. He said it with a certainty that wasn't wishful. It was the certainty of a person who had seen someone they loved decide to fight and trusted what they saw. She's going to be better than okay. They sat in the comfortable quiet of a shared space that had begun to feel for both of them like a place they belonged. The Electroglide was finished on a Saturday in late November. Ethan had worked the last hours the night before staying past midnight to complete the final assembly, checking every connection, every torque spec, every alignment with the methodical care of a man who could not release a machine until he was satisfied. He'd rebuilt this bike for 6 years. He'd stripped parts from it to save a stranger's motorcycle on a desperate October night. He'd watched it sit incomplete while his shop nearly went under and then found its footing again. The machine had been with him through the whole of it, patient in the corner under its canvas cover, waiting. He started it at 7:15 Saturday morning. The engine caught on the first try. He sat on the Electroglide in the middle of his garage and listened to it run, his hands on the handlebars he'd chosen specifically for their fit, the seat he'd reupholstered in the right leather, the pipes that carried a note exactly as he'd intended. He sat and listened and felt the machine underneath him, solid and right and entirely his, in the way that things you build with your own hands are entirely yours. He rode it out of the garage. He took it south on Union, picked up the on-ramp to the highway and let it run. The morning was cold and clear, and the Central Valley stretched flat in every direction, and the bike ran exactly as he'd known it would, strong, responsive, steady, built to be ridden, not admired. He held it at 70 for 10 miles without doing anything except being present in the ride in the morning, in the particular physical experience of moving through the world on a machine you trust completely. He thought about a lot of things on those 10 miles. He thought about Danny, who would hear about this on Sunday's call and would ask detailed questions about the engine displacement and the seat height, with the focused interest of a man who never rode but loved the idea of his brother riding. He thought about Renee, who had finally gotten the whole story 2 weeks ago, sitting on the phone for 90 minutes while he told it, start to finish, and who had been quiet for a long moment at the end and then said simply, "You stopped. You've always been this kind of person who stops. He thought about Coop and Eddie and Terrell and Diane and Joel and Marcus and Kayla and Logan and Gerald and Walt and the woman from Porterville whose name he'd learned was Sandra and who had come back twice since with her own bikes and her sisters. He thought about the eviction notice in the trash under the workbench. He thought about Ray Delgado walking into his shop on a Tuesday morning and looking around with those still measuring eyes. He thought about a young man lying beside a destroyed motorcycle at 2 in the morning, terrified, and the decision Ethan had made in the doorway of his shop before he even fully understood what the decision was. He pulled off at the next exit and turned around. Heading back north on the highway, the shop visible in the distance, as he came off the ramp, the appointment book full inside it, and Joel already at work on a Monday prep job, and Coop's bike running clean, and Kayla Carter starting a new job, Monday morning. Ethan Walker understood something that had been true for a while, but that he was only now able to see clearly enough to hold. The shop had not been saved by Marcus Reynolds. It had not been saved by Mojave Iron Holdings, or the 5-year covenant, or the fleet service agreement, or Coop's word of mouth, or any single thing that had arrived from outside. Those things were real. They had mattered enormously. But they were responses to something. They were what happened when a person who had built something true was seen by the right people at the right time. What Marcus had told him the first Friday at Rosario's over coffee and noise, and the particular warmth of people who knew each other well, what you gave deserved what you're getting. But the thing you gave had to be real first. The thing you gave had to be genuinely you, not performed, not calculated, not done with one eye on what it might return. Ethan had fixed Logan's bike in the dark alone at cost to himself for a stranger he didn't know, because a young man was frightened and had done something brave in an imperfect way and deserved to be met by someone who gave a damn about that. He'd done it because Danny had lain on a highway shoulder for 37 minutes. He'd done it because his hands were good and the work was right and stopping was what he was. That was the thing that nothing could manufacture. That was the thing that every other thing had been a response to. He parked the Electroglide in the garage beside the current work-in-progress bikes and shut the engine off and sat on it for a moment in the quiet. Joel appeared from the back of the shop, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at the bike. He looked at Ethan. He had the face of a young mechanic who understood quality and recognized it. "That's yours," Joel said. "Yeah." Joel walked around it slowly, reading it the way a mechanic reads a machine. "You built this." "Most of it," Ethan said. 6 years. Joel crouched beside the front wheel and looked at the fork assembly. Stood back up, looked at the tank, the pipes, the overall line of the machine. "This is the best bike I've ever stood next to. It's the most honest thing I've ever built," Ethan said. Joel looked at him, nodded once with the simple gravity of a young craftsman understanding a thing worth understanding. Then he went back to work. Ethan sat on the bike for one more moment. Outside, the morning was going warmer, the November sun cutting through the cool at the angle that meant the day would open up into something decent. Somewhere in Bakersfield, Kayla Carter was preparing for a Monday that was going to be different from the Monday before it. Danny was watching a baseball highlights reel in a group home in Modesto. Renee was in Phoenix. Coop was probably riding on a highway somewhere, holding 65, filling the bike run clean. Marcus Reynolds was out there too in some meeting on some road, in the quiet work of maintaining a community of people who rode together. He would stop by again. He always stopped by. Not because anything needed fixing, just because Walker's was now a place he came to, a place that was part of the geography of his life. And Ethan Walker was exactly where he had been for 9 years in his shop, with his tools, with his hands that told the whole story of his adult life, with the work that was true, and the standards that didn't bend, and the belief tested now in ways it hadn't been before, and proven to sound that doing the right thing when nobody is watching matters. Not sometimes, not when it's convenient, not when the return is clear, always. Because the night Ethan Walker ran toward a crash in the dark and spent 6 hours fixing a stranger's motorcycle with his own parts and his own blood in his own hands and asked for nothing, that night did not save his shop. That night revealed who he was, and who he was turned out to be exactly enough.